I'm so glad to see you on my channel. The story begins on a beautiful moonlit night, with bright lights and voices ablaze inside a luxurious villa. There were people sitting at a table, drinking a variety of drinks, smoking cigarettes, and talking loudly. The man held the girl by the head and rudely said that he was going to go to the toilet, and when he returned, he would teach her a lesson. He opened the door and went outside, where there was a huge and very deep pool. The man began to walk along the pool, deep in thought about something. He sat down with his back against the wall and asked himself a certain question when he heard some noise. Suddenly he jumped up from his seat, and some force knocked him right into the pool. There was a loud splash, and the man fell into it, screaming for help. The pool turned red with blood, and the water began to gurgle, carrying the man down. The leader gave the order to the people who worked for him to come out and take their positions. The scuba divers began diving into the pool in search of the man and following the orders of their superior. The man grabbed the gun and started shouting that there were enemies around. He asked them to show themselves immediately and inquired who they were. But before he could finish speaking, he was shot in the forehead. The rest of the guys held machine guns and said that the enemy was attacking and that they needed to take cover. They ran as fast as they could out of the room and glanced to the side. Some powerful projectile was flying towards them, and the guy looked at it carefully and realized what it was. One boy grabbed the weapon with his hand, but didn't have time to do anything because he was already covered in blood. Everything around lit up with a bright light, and blood began to spray after the flash grenade exploded. The guys started looking ahead and shooting at their enemies with machine guns. One of them hid in a shelter and glanced in their direction out of the corner of his eye. He came out of hiding and pointed the pistol at the villains, calling them names. One of the enemies was already heading towards him and ended up behind him trying to grab him. The guy didn't expect that there would be someone behind him and that he had already started to choke him, after which he performed a move and broke his arm, and the gun flew out of his hands. The man suddenly had a knife in his hand and brought it closer to his opponent. He swung the knife, and the boy was killed. The man exclaimed that the perimeter was clear. Iskra was the senior instructor of the Manga Special Forces unit, and he gave the command to the snipers to take their positions. Meanwhile, the guys who were sitting in the room at the table were holding pistols in their hands. People with guns burst in and started shooting at everyone sitting at the table and in the room. A lot of shell casings fell on the floor after powerful, strong shots, and so 10 minutes passed. The boy reported to his commander that the main target had been eliminated. He was told that a helicopter with reinforcements would arrive in 30 minutes. While the captain was smoking a cigarette and thinking about something, another person approached him. He asked the man if he wanted a drink and explained that these scoundrels' wine was quite expensive. The captain asked the boys to be patient for a little while until the helicopter arrived. Then the guy said that as soon as they landed, he'd drink everything down and had no intention of leaving them anything. Someone asked if he'd found a game console, and he'd heard the last mission was about a cuckold and a head being blown off. The second one asked if he was a child, playing with toys. He found a beautiful gold Zippo lighter. The captain called the boys a bunch of idiots. The boy laughed and exclaimed that the man only talks about beauties. Since the founding of the country of EL, it had been in constant military conflict with the country of N over territory. Under the newly elected leader, the country of EL's military might rapidly expanded. He used secret weapons to force the country to continue its resistance and eventually retake the occupied territory. Of all the aces up his sleeve, the most famous is considered to be a unit of fighters called Spock. And now the helicopter was already in the sky, which surprised the boys greatly. They really did arrive quickly. Not even 30 minutes had passed. The commander looked closely at the helicopter, his brows drawn closer to his nose. The captain looked up and thought that something was clearly wrong here, and the helicopter continued to approach. Suddenly, a huge, powerful projectile began to fly out of it, and a bright flash occurred. When the powerful explosion occurred, the captain exclaimed, covering his head, that it was the enemy. The explosion was very strong, and bright tongues of flame approached them, burning everything around. The captain asked where the enemy had gotten reinforcements and whether their mission was top secret. Enemy reinforcements had arrived, and he was requesting support from headquarters. The captain ordered snipers and observers to be ready and cover the special forces. The guys immediately put out their guns and pointed them towards the helicopter. One of them was hit by a powerful blast of bright golden fire, and blood sprayed in all directions. The captain asked his comrade Xiao Go if he was okay, looking at his partner who was sitting on the floor and holding his shoulder with his hand. The boy replied that he was fine and exclaimed that it was a waste of white wine. The guy pointed his machine gun forward and, while firing, asked for the bleeding to stop immediately. They asked the Dragonhawk if the sniper was still there, and the guy was told that he was already there. Then the man asked him if he was sure, and he asked him to be calmer. The guy with the machine gun in his hands asked the captain to rely on him and not to worry. The captain immediately agreed and asked his comrade to get down to business. He pointed his weapon and began to aim very carefully. The guy started shooting and asked the dragonhawk and pheasant to respond immediately. There was an ominous silence, and he realized that these shots were not from their weapons. The boy couldn't understand how their mission could be discovered and who it could be. He tried to understand what was really going on and heard some noise not far from him. The helicopter continued to circle over their heads, and the fire in the area was very strong. They encountered enemy reinforcements and tried to request support from headquarters. One was shot down, and contact with the other two was lost. They encountered enemy reinforcements and again requested support from headquarters. The captain thought and tried to understand what was happening, grabbing his weapon. In front of him stood another guy who also lowered his gaze, deep in thought. Suddenly the guy jumped up, running away from his friend, and decided to act differently. There was another powerful explosion, and the captain pulled the pin and decided to throw the grenade. When the boy threw the grenade, he looked to the side and saw how much blood was splattered around. He didn't expect it to be his blood, and wasn't there a team behind him? The boy was badly wounded and blood was flowing from his hand, and the grenade was in his hand. The comrade pointed straight at the sky, and the captain looked in that direction too. The guys were fully armed and held their machine guns in front of them. The captain, with blood on his face, looked at the weapons that were pointed in his direction. Shots could be heard flying towards him, and scarlet streams of blood splattered in different directions. He asked his comrade Shalgo why the enemies were in the rear. He didn't understand how this was even possible, how something like this could happen at all. The boy kept repeating the same phrase and asking how this was even possible. This phrase hung in his head, and he, completely bloodied and shocked, stood on his knees, exhausted. One of the boys approached him and exclaimed that nothing was impossible. The boy looked closely and recognized the man standing before him. He replied that it was indeed him and that he was truly sorry and took out his gun. He stepped on the captain's head with his foot and said that it was time to finish. The gun was pointed at his head, and he kept repeating how this was even possible and why he did it. Suddenly the main character opened his eyes and tried to understand what he was. He thought about it and remembered how he was shot, as if it had happened before his eyes. He had absolutely no strength, but he felt that he was still alive. Clutching his knee with his hand, he tried to understand what had happened and tried to open his eyes. It was hard for him to understand why he was still alive. He looked at his hand and thought about how he had decided to slowly torture it. Are they really watching him? And where's the camera? What's all this for? The wound is deep and the bleeding needs to be stopped. He immediately extended his hand forward and grabbed it with his other hand. He said that he had already lost so much, and there was no time to hesitate. He looked at the table and saw a stapler on it. The boy decided that this would do and brought the stapler closer to his hand, after which he began to scream. Blood started flowing from his hand, and he was in a lot of pain. He was really alive. The guy looked at his hand again and realized that it was his hand and voice. He was sitting on the floor covered in drops of blood, and his face was covered in small plasters. He began to approach the mirror, and his hand was indeed in place, whereas just recently it had been torn off in a volley. He approached the mirror and put his hand on it, looking closely at himself. He leaned over in front of the mirror and looked at his face again, deep in thought. What's going on, and how is this even possible? The boy thought, not understanding anything. Suddenly he turned towards the door as someone knocked on the door. He heard whose voice it was, and someone told Shosian that dinner was ready and he needed to go eat. The man said he understood how difficult it was for him, but they needed to have lunch together. The protagonist thought about a name. The man explained that he had prepared his favorite dish, calling him Huang Shaoxian again. Some guy was in front of him and asked him to eat his favorite burger. The main character could not understand why all this was happening and what he had done that was so bad. Then the guy approached him and exclaimed that because of him no one could have lunch, calling him a bad word. The other guys were nearby and were saying that they would have finished long ago if it weren't for him. They asked him to hurry up because they wanted to eat too. They asked how much longer they would have to hang around here, and the boy tried to understand what was going on. Then the thug grabbed him by the collar and threw him back, kicking him in the body. He started beating the boy, and he bent over and began to fall to the floor right in front of the guys. He fell to the floor, and standing over him was the same scoundrel who had just beaten him with all his might. He crossed his arms and called the boy a parasite. He was warning him not to do anything stupid. He asked if the boy had forgotten that he had evidence. The main character looked up at him, and the guy continued to say that he was disturbing their rest and everyone could see it. The guys asked if he wanted to apologize to them and handed him the burger. Then the boy started chewing the burger the guys had made right in front of them. The guys watched him carefully as he did this, and Huang Shaoxian understood what was going on. After much bullying, A cockroach burger was the final straw that broke the teenager. He considered suicide, but the irony is that he was reborn. And so he looked in the mirror at his face, which was covered in bandages after the abuse of those scoundrels. He was reincarnated as a teenager from Country A named Huang Shaoxian, his past life frozen in an instant. Along with his teammates, he lost all trust and hope in his life. He will surely take revenge and will never forgive those who betrayed him. Fate decreed that he be reborn as a weak teenager, without strength, without money, without power. But in his hometown, there's a saying. In the most remote place, you can find a pasture with plenty of water and grass. He has memories and experiences from his past life. This distinguishes him from ordinary people, and he knows the enemy, while the enemy doesn't know him. The advantage is definitely on his side. Now his main goal is to gain authority and find an opportunity to gather information. He decided to be patient and bide his time. It is difficult to conquer peaks on an empty stomach, and at first he wanted to adapt to his current situation and surroundings. He will sort out the problem and meet the family. The main character decided to fulfill his wish, and may God bless his soul. He wrote a letter to his parents, and by the time they read it, he would already be in the other world. He asked forgiveness for his selfishness, but if he survived, he would certainly answer for his actions and become the strongest man alive. His father told him that his mother had put a lot of effort into preparing dinner. He asked his son to eat while the food was still warm, and he immediately agreed. Could these really be Huang Shaoxian's parents? The boy thought about how he'd never had any. Do they really do this every day, and it smells much better than the cafeteria? But using chopsticks was very difficult for him. He couldn't understand how Asians managed to eat them, and his parents stared at him in surprise. The boy started eating and grinned, surprised by the Chinese cuisine. The mother looked closely at her son and was very surprised that he was smiling so much with joy. The father asked his wife to ignore him because he was very hungry. This had happened before, and she immediately calmed down. The woman looked at her son and said that since he was healthy, she was calm. She told Shaoxian that she would leave some food at the door. His mother asked him to remember that he needed to eat to study well. Suddenly the son turned to his mother and said that he would no longer go to the academy. She did not expect such a turn of events and asked what this was all about. She asked him if it was difficult for him to study, and he, hanging his head down, replied that he was simply sick. His mother turned to him and looked at his arm, alarmed. She said he'd been covered in bruises ever since he'd entered the Mountain Hawk Academy. The boy lowered his head and, closing his eyes, answered his mother that everything was fine and that it was all because of military training. Then they asked him if he got along with his new classmates and if they hit him. A strange sadness appeared in the son's eyes, but he didn't show it. The boy looked up at his parents and said that everything was fine, and they were very kind to him. His mother was delighted after these words and exclaimed that this was wonderful and that in this case, Mommy would be at peace. But he was determined to repay them in kind. And now several days have passed. The sky was blue and bright, and the birds sang very loudly. And here before us was the Mountain Hawk Academy. Huang Shaoxian approached the entrance. The boy greeted the girl and, apologizing, asked if she could tell him where his dorm was. She wondered what was wrong with him. He inherited all the grievances and desires. The guy with a cigarette in his hand said that he lost again. The pests won't understand their mistake unless they're taught a lesson, and the boy says he's back. Meanwhile, the boys were sitting in the room, each in their own place, and they exclaimed that a defeat had occurred. When the main character came in, he unexpectedly called them losers. He looked at them carefully and asked if they were surprised by his appearance. Then one of them turned around and said that he was worried about who to let off steam on, but it came into his hands. He called him dead and asked where he had been for several days, staring at him. He asked if he liked the burger. The boy replied that it had made a mess on his bunk. The guy was surprised when he heard what he had just said and asked if he really thought they would report to him. And what did he just hear? What was that tone? And he really did mess things up a bit. The guy asked what he was going to do, if he was going to hit him, and laughed. He asked not to tell him about the ruined bed, otherwise he would come to his house and ruin it. Suddenly the protagonist clenched his fist and hit the scoundrel with all his might on the chin. He said, looking into his eyes, that in their East there is one interesting proverb. The saying goes that when raising children, don't spare the rod. The boy kicked him in the body with all his might. This scoundrel was simply shocked by this turn of events, and the guys began to approach him. They called Huang Shaoxian a scoundrel, and the cigarettes flew out of their mouths. The boy had already gotten into a fighting stance to continue dealing with these guys. In terms of physical fitness, this body is too weak. But the most powerful weapon in the human body is the elbows, and he began to use a technique using his elbows. He approached the other side and hit him again with all his might. The boy continued to fight with these scoundrels, Apparently, he decided to take revenge on them for everything they did to him. The protagonist thought about his knees. When he looked at the other, he had a wonderful thought. If you use these two weapons, then even a weakling will gain the upper hand over the rest. Thinking about this, the main character continued to beat these scoundrels with all his might, without sparing. They were scattered across the floor, and the boy began to head straight for the door. The boy decided that from today on, none of his offenders would escape revenge. The boys ran one faster than the other, and sweat ran down their faces. The leader told the boys to line up immediately, and they could barely catch their breath. The main character also ran and stopped to catch his breath. The instructor called a boy with long hair and asked him to come to him. When he approached the instructor, he immediately and unexpectedly hit him in the face. Huang Shaoxian was simply shocked by this turn of events and fell to his knees in front of the instructor. The man asked why he was trailing at the very back, even though the girls had overtaken him. He asked the student if he felt ashamed. The boy replied that he told him that he had a fever yesterday and his body had not yet recovered. Before he could finish speaking, the instructor shut him up again and said that flu season was long over. He asked him not to try to hide behind that. He simply has no desire to improve himself, but he has time to come up with excuses. Huang Shaoxian wanted to say that he really didn't feel well, but the man again stretched his hand toward him. He grabbed the boy by the head and exclaimed that he had already told him not to make excuses. He can only repeat the same thing, and he again asks him not to justify himself to him. The guys who bullied Huang Shaoyan appeared from behind, and they approached the instructor. They crossed their arms over their chests and looked angrily at the main character who was being bullied by the instructor. The man said his hair was too long, and he looked like a girl. Didn't his father teach him what a man should look like, or was his father also effeminate? The man asked to listen carefully and said that the special training of first-year students at the Mountain Hawk Academy is a tradition that has been maintained since the founding of the educational institution. It needs to be taken seriously because it affects their final grade at the end of the year, or they will end up like this kid. When the instructor finished speaking, he stepped on the boy's toe and he screamed. Was he really being used as an example? Huang Shaoxian exclaimed that this was standard military discipline, but it was too much for ordinary students. Shaoxian's memory began to recover, although there were still gaps, and it was as if it was happening to him, which was very strange. It takes time to learn about Country A and gather information, otherwise he will become confused and commit a rash act. Besides, this body is quite frail, so training will take some time. His coordination and reaction time are also lacking, so there's nothing he can do, so he'll meet with the instructor on Monday. The boy was at home when his mother approached him. She asked why he had returned and if he had forgotten his keys. He's been leaving very early lately, and she asked if he trains. Huang Shaoxian replied that he does indeed train. He thought to himself that the poor mother didn't know that her son was dead, and that a successful Special Forces soldier had been reborn in his body. But since this is an irreversible thing, you have to live and come to terms with it. The boy thought that he had become interested in one town here, and was impressed by the old saying about the sandbank. People who can't climb will eventually die, but he's already an adult, and it's time for him to learn to climb. Huang Shaoxian told his father that he was grateful to them for the gift of a second life, but he had his own worldview. He looked at his parents and asked if he was telling the truth. He told them not to worry, as he would repay Shaoxian's offenders with interest. October 21st in the fall was the last day of the annual exams at the Mountain Hawk Academy. The classroom where the students were located was completely silent. The academy's current students are well developed, and the quality of the micro camera is also good. The work was done at the highest level. He will edit it a little and sell it on the internet for a fortune. The man laughed. These simpletons think he's some kind of fiend from hell, and it's funny. He looked at the main character and thought that this runt was ruining the whole shot. How did such a piece of trash end up on the best recording? Still, he should thank him. Thanks to him, he'll climb a notch higher in his career. Otherwise, with his background, he wouldn't have made it to the Daisheng. He decided that Shaoxian was his lucky break. The guy asked him if he wanted to work for their company as a Daisheng security guard. Then the man with the cigarette asked if he was serious and even knew what he was talking about. The man laughed and said that of course he knew. All the Daisheng guards were retired Special Forces soldiers. Of course, they were no match for him, a regular policeman. Well, now that he knows, he can't let go. The man told the gentleman it was time for him to return to training for first-year Mountain Hawks. He knew, after all, that the academy director placed great emphasis on the closed first-year training program. It can be said that it is a key factor in the end-of-year assessments. The man replied that he knew that the master didn't like it when his freedom and comfort were infringed. Well, if the young gentleman wants to smoke and drink, then he'll drink. and if the young gentleman wants to take a stroll at night, then he'll take a stroll. Then the guy asked if he thought the young gentleman was capable of such a thing. The man replied that no, and he had no right to doubt his abilities. He could simply use him to avoid unnecessary risks and troubles. He has some connections in the criminal district in case the gentleman needs contraband. He can even get the red pill if necessary. The boy laughed and called him a fine fellow, still smoking a cigarette. His older brother had always been responsible for guarding the Dasheng, and they had never gotten along. If his subordinate could get him a pill, perhaps he would put in a good word. The man told his master that if he helped him join the Dasheng, he would give him not only the pill, but also his life. Then the boy approached the man and said that he wanted to test his loyalty. He asked if the man would see the long-haired guy with the backpack. He studies with him, and during special training, he asks to be kicked. The protagonist seemed to understand they were talking about him. The man asked if he was the young gentleman's enemy, to which he replied that he was not, and that he was simply irritated by his hairstyle. The man who was watching on video surveillance realized that he was simply unlucky enough to become the villain's target. Suddenly someone knocked on the door and he was surprised because it was noon, after which he asked to come in since he was open. The main character appeared on the threshold and looked closely at the man. He thought about how you can't talk about people behind their backs, but this guy, he thought he wouldn't come back after the bullying. Then he asked if it was Huang Shaxian in front of him. What was wrong with him? He wasn't the same as before, and had he really changed his hairstyle? He approached the boy, who looked at him closely and asked why he was looking for him. The man appeared to be about 35 years old, about 180 centimeters tall, and weighed approximately 85 kilograms. The figure is relatively proportional, but there is excess fat, weakness, a slow gait, and a stiff posture. He dares to assume the man is unprepared. The habit of holding the belt with the right hand suggests a military background. His hands are rough, suggesting he may have undergone training. Though this isn't certain, suggesting his body control isn't very high. With his current physical condition, a one-on-one fight could be risky, and the best way to win was to act differently. He approached the instructor and said, handing him a small box. Then the instructor asked what was wrong with him and whether he had decided to appease him. He had insulted Mr. Chin, and he couldn't accept the gift, so he was telling him to get lost. The protagonist realized the man knew Shaxian was being bullied. He told the instructor he'd misunderstood him, and that Mr. Chin had already forgiven him, now carrying out his orders as his trusted confidant. The man was very surprised and asked if the gentleman had really asked him. He thought to himself that now it was clear why the boy had changed his hairstyle and personality. After all, he had a patron and was just pretending. The protagonist looked at him closely and said that maybe admitting mistakes was a good thing. The man laughed and said he was a good guy and didn't think he'd figure it out so quickly. After all the abuse he'd endured, he almost thought he'd go crazy. The man thought the boy was holding up well, and he'd rather hang himself if he were in his place. Shaxian thought it was all thanks to the instructor's words. If they weren't good enough, they needed to improve themselves. So he decided to give them a gift, hoping the instructor would accept it as a thank you. The man was surprised because it was an Apple 16. It had just gone on sale. He stood in line for 11 hours and still couldn't buy it. The boy said that he didn't need any thanks and that he was simply doing his job as an instructor. It was time for him to go, but he was asked to ask him one question. Then the man asked what it was. For 2 days he was stuck in the humiliating and unbearable memories of that Shaxian boy. He saw him watching the boy's suffering with an intriguing expression on his face. It seemed to say that Shaxian himself was to blame for this and that he died, but no one understood this. The main character thought about this without understanding why he in particular. He began to approach the instructor who was holding a gift in his hands. He kept asking why, and how such a weakling would accidentally encounter a spawn of hell. This boy will never know why he became the scapegoat of these scoundrels who bullied him. Suddenly, Shaxian's mother noticed that her bag was torn, and she had only bought 2 eggs. She felt very sorry for having wasted so much time, and began picking up eggs from the floor. She wondered how her son was doing, and whether he had taken the cell phone she had bought him. Meanwhile, the instructor, after being hit by Shaxian, hunched over and called him a brat. But the main character did not stop beating him, because he brought a lot of suffering to the guy in whose body he is now. He thrust his fist out and hit him with all his might on the jaw. After that, he started to approach his street and hit him in the face with his knee as hard as he could. Even a weakling can hit these vulnerable spots, and he did it. But of course, that's not the main thing. The man was already sitting on his knees, holding his battered face with both hands. The boy decided, raising his hand up, that the key step was in one thing. Namely, it is necessary to take full initiative and catch them off guard. The boy took something out of his backpack and began to approach the man again. Shaxian was already near the man who was lying on the floor and was looking at him attentively. He was seriously scared when the main character started to approach him, and he asked him not to do it. Then Shaxian asked if he could answer the question right now. He asked him not to rush, as he was not in a hurry and was listening carefully. The guy was asked not to overexert himself, because the doctor said he had a mild concussion. The man slammed his fist on the table and told him to shut up, because those scumbags were talking nonsense. They wouldn't even sneeze in his direction. The boy was asked to listen to his mother and calm down. He still needs to lie down and be observed in the hospital. There's no need to be angry with his mother, because she's worried about him. The guy shouted that he would come out and find everyone. Just let them wait. So what's going on? And my mother asked me to tell her about it. The guy immediately shut her up. He said that if she continued to bleat, he would shut her mouth himself. And she looked at him sadly. The woman was telling her son she'd ordered her favorite turtle soup. He continued to cover her mouth and asked if she didn't understand human speech and to get out of there. The girl asked if the eldest second son of the Chin family had always been so spoiled. She asked why he was keeping quiet, since he'd been sent to the hospital on business. Then the man asked him to keep his mouth shut and do his job properly. The girl told the older man that he was too serious and that it was boring to just stand there. And he didn't want to chat with her. She should have resigned if she'd known being a security guard was so boring. The man replied that she'd adapted better than he thought. It was no wonder she'd been hired for a position in N's intelligence service. It was Qin Sheng, the heir to the Qin family and CEO of the Desheng Company. He looked at Miss Mona Trent and said that this was their first meeting. The girl did not expect this when she saw the gentleman and asked if he recognized her. The man explained that he was currently in charge of security, so he remembered information about all the employees. While the guys were talking about this, the door suddenly opened and a woman looked inside. She noticed Shen had arrived and, wiping away tears, apologized for her mistake. His mother asked when he had returned and said she hadn't heard the notification. The guy explained that he had just gotten off the plane and asked his mother not to be upset. He was still young and impulsive, and he would definitely talk to him instead. The mother agreed with her second son and said that Tian was having a hard time now, but he was listening to her. Meanwhile, the guy went out into the corridor and, lighting a cigarette, thought about something. The girl described the gentleman as being very nice. Her partner responded that her behavior was unprofessional. Meanwhile, the girl who appeared in the corridor asked to contact her immediately and say that Shen had returned. He entered the room and turned to his brother. He said that it didn't seem like such a big problem. Qin lowered his head and began to listen to his brother. Sheng asked not to blame him for lecturing him, but he must respect his elders. His mother hadn't had a hard time raising him, and he would speak to the point. Before leaving abroad, he said he would manage District 26 for 2 years. However, a month later, he was hospitalized and asked to be told what had happened. He only had 9 minutes, and his little brother stared down, lost in thought. Ever since Mr. Cranky Child had entered, he'd been quiet. The girl noticed and asked if something was wrong. She even started to worry a little, wondering if Mr. Shen liked her. He replied that he was her employer and asked her to stop fantasizing about nonsense. It would be better if she knew his true nature. The girl remarked that she knew Mr. Sheng very well. At 17, he became the lightweight champion of Sandshu in Country A. He was then included in the World Youth Games and won a gold belt in the Mixed Martial Arts Super League. He suffered no defeats and became the new star of the fighting arena, known to everyone. However, at 23, due to excessive attention, he announced his retirement and disappeared. He later reappeared and attended a Desheng Company Awards conference. The public thought that the reason for his return was the inheritance of the family business. But few people know that a year earlier, he began running a racket in the seedy neighborhood and became its underground king. It seems the girl hasn't heard much about this. Shen walked out the door and said that they were former intelligence officers and had to protect their employer's privacy. The young man thought that he certainly hadn't retired on his own. Most likely, he'd been forced into it. On the other hand, since Miss Trent does not need translation, he wants to ask for a favor. He explained to the girl that he needed to study one person. The girl replied that everything would be done. Detailed information will be sent via text message, but for now he is forced to leave. The man wished her a safe journey. Meanwhile, the boy was asked to listen carefully and not let this brat get out of bed again. He wanted Shang Xuan to answer in full. The boy thought about how much time had passed since the last time he met a man whose evidence was kept in one place. This compromising information is enough to get you several years behind bars. If he hands him over, it will be seen as revenge for Shosian, or so the protagonist thought. He left this man with a painted face and bloody, and he thought that this man was a demon. Shaxian approached the man and said it was already evening and time for him to go home for dinner. Eastern food tastes best when served hot. He tormented him with an expressionless gaze, as if he were looking at an animal, completely devoid of emotion. Shaxian said that as an instructor, he wasn't doing his job and could have killed him, but the sandbank wouldn't allow it, so he'll hand him over to the law and let the police sort through the evidence and put him on trial. Could he really be scared and regretting everything? Why didn't he think about the consequences when he indulged in this bullying? And he almost forgot to settle some matters. The boy glanced at him as he left. He remembered how there was a tall tree not far from them and the guy was on it. Suddenly the door opened, and he walked into the office. The boy thought about finding a place to freshen up and make it in time for dinner. He looks attractive in the photo, but he doesn't like spicy food. I wonder if his preferences have changed since his transformation. He might ask Shaorin's mom to cook something from their kitchen. While he was heading towards the house, one of the guys called on the phone and said that he had found him. He asked whether he should act now, but the guy asked him not to rush. He gave the order to gather the guys from the academy, and he will certainly kill him. The protagonist walked down the street, and behind him were guys watching him. They were following him, and the boy sensed it as he turned around a large building. He asked why they had returned so soon. Apparently, he hadn't beaten them hard enough last time. Then one of the guys asked him if he remembered what happened and said something about his classmate Liu Lian. He called him weak and asked him not to show off. Then he attacked from the shadows and would have killed him. But the boy looked at him boldly and asked him to be a little quieter. Then the guy realized that it was clearly him and he was definitely dead. Shaxian, approaching his opponent, asked Liu Lian if they would dance now. Then he called him a scoundrel and exclaimed that he would tear him to pieces. His comrades asked Brother Liang not to hold back and kill him. For his insolence, he deserves another crispy burger. Huang Shaoxian will leave here feet first today. The girl said that the person they asked to check on some minor problems and she asked if she should intervene. Then the man asked what was going on, and the girl replied that he was surrounded by the young gentleman's friends, and she had already seen them. The guy asked if she had thoroughly checked the man's background. If so, she could just be watching him. The guy with the cigarette in his hand mentioned that Tian had also shown up with his vengeful nature. He handed the phone to Mr. Jiang and said that he wanted to discuss an important matter with him and asked him to wait. Jiang replied that since the red pill had entered the market in District 25, profits from the underground business had increased by 300%. Many of his superiors felt that District should also grab a piece of the action. Jiang Huaizhong was the chairman of the board of the entertainment department, the heir of the Jiang family, and the executive director of investments. He asked them to stop and not talk about what was bothering their bosses. He wanted to know their opinion. The man said he thought this was a great opportunity to move the criminal underworld of the 26th district one step further. Such profits are indeed attractive, but it still claims that the 26th district is absolutely drug-free, and anyone who meddles in his affairs will pay with their lives. The area is drug-free, and no one dares mingle. The guy said that was his answer. Then the man asked her not to look down on him. They'd been friends for so many years after all, and didn't he know him? He'd pass the message on to his boss and convey his opinion of them, that they should enjoy life, and when they get old, retire and not interfere in anything. That's what they agreed on. Shen mentioned that he needed to attend the mayor's daughter's wedding reception, and Jiang replied that he would escort him there. But the young man said no, he had other things to do, so he'd find his own way. As the boy was leaving, he asked Mr. Jiang to take care of himself and slammed the door. Jiang remained standing near his desk and looked at it thoughtfully. He mentioned Shen's name and how dare he insult him like that. How dare he take his place on his territory? He's just a retired boxer and should be respected. He should be the one to become the underground king. Sooner or later, Jiang will tear him into pieces, and he will suffer greatly. The man continued to get nervous and smashed the furniture in his office into small pieces. His anger simply knew no bounds, and he continued throwing stools in different directions. The girl was indoors and tried to hide from such powerful blows. Suddenly, Mr. Jiang turned towards her and asked her to get out immediately. He explained to the girl, looking at her with disdain, that he was in a completely bad mood right now, and the guy asked Brother Lian to kill him and tear this scoundrel apart. The protagonist realized that it worked, and, as they say in the art of war, attacking the heart means attacking the mind. The best way to defeat someone is to anger them. Liu Lian is Qin Tian's #1 henchman. He often bullied Shaxian, and one might even say he was his bully. He scanned him completely and realized that this guy was twice his size, so he wouldn't have had any chance of winning if he were a normal person. He had poor self-control, was easily irritated, was extremely emotional, and lacked any stable psychological qualities. The conclusion was that the probability of victory was quite high. He swung his right fist, or, to be more precise, his dominant one. He made a left turn, his speed dropped significantly, and his body became uncoordinated. The front kick is not high enough. There is no threat, and the flexibility leaves much to be desired. The boy exclaimed that the little rascal was indeed agile. Again, the right fist and no change in movement. He has poor concentration and a low IQ. The protagonist continued to think that most likely this was a triple strike from left to right with a frontal strike. The girl also watched what was happening. And when she saw the triple blow, she became bored. Lilin began to swing his fists, and the boy very deftly dodged these blows. Suddenly he found himself in front of him and tried to prevent the blow with his hand. The boy very deftly grabbed his hand and he looked at him carefully. Shaxian, without knowing it, grabbed his hand with one hand, and with the other he brought it closer to his face. He dealt him a powerful blow, and he winced from pain and the unexpectedness of such a turn of events. Lulin also wanted to strike back and raised his hand as high as he could above his head. He had already put his hand on the boy's neck, and he put his palms forward. The fat man tried to hit him, but the boy was very agile and dodged the blow again. The protagonist noticed that the strength of this body was still too weak and needed more training. Lulien called him a bastard and exclaimed that he would definitely catch him. He tried to dodge and hit his opponent in the body with all his might. Then he turned around again and put his hand forward to hit his opponent again. Lulin was seriously scared because he thought that the boy wanted to wring his neck. He dodged, covered his face with one hand, and wanted to hit him with the other. The protagonist's eyes glowed with a bright, fiery light as if he were a vampire. The boy decided to take advantage of the moment and jump on him. When he approached, he delivered a powerful blow, and the opponent blocked it. He was in great pain as the blow hit his chest, and tears welled up in his eyes from pain and surprise. The girl who was watching him decided, looking at what was happening, that he was using a dirty trick. She thought about how he'd won. All the previous attacks had been for a finishing blow. She decided the kid really was smart. Lulien sat on his knees and said that he would kill him and get him out from under the ground. He promised to send him to the next world with his own hands, and Shakshin hit him with all his might on the head with a backpack. The girl looked again and saw that he had knocked him out. Did this guy really have bricks in his backpack? Lulien's comrades were simply shocked and asked how he was able to defeat him only by stealth. The boy was already heading toward his comrades who were frozen in anticipation. When his opponent came close, he hit him with all his might with one hand. Then he did the same with the second one, and he, grimacing, began to fall straight to the ground. The main character did this with everyone else, and he very cleverly took them all down. The fight continued, and the boys were already seriously frightened by the boy's strength. How he managed to take them all down in just a few tries. One of the guys asked him not to be afraid because he was alone, but there were many of them. The main character clenched his fists and remembered what they say in Shoujo: if they see a tiger showing its teeth, they should not think that it is smiling. The boys froze in anticipation, as the boy was already approaching them with a huge hammer. They decided he was nuts, and that this scoundrel had lost his mind if he'd picked up such a huge hammer. They decided to get their butts in gear and run away as quickly as possible. Shaxian decided that they were just a bunch of rabble in front of him, and if they had been a little bolder, he would have had a hard time. But the goal was achieved, and the most difficult problem was solved with minimal effort. The boy said he'd noticed it a long time ago and asked to leave. The girl replied that she didn't think a street fight would make an impression on her. He first disarmed the most capable opponent, then effectively defeated him, striking him with a blow that exerted psychological pressure. He demonstrated the weapon, thereby completely breaking the enemy's psychological defense line. She expresses deep gratitude, and thanks to him, her task became less boring. He seemed like a simple, weak guy, but with such a strong heart. As far as she understood, he had adopted the country's martial arts and where he had learned them. Shashin asked who she was, why she was following him, and who had sent her. Then the girl replied that if he wanted to know, then they should first swipe, and if he won, then she would tell him. Meanwhile, a variety of delicacies, lamb, rice, and soybeans were sold at the market. They also sold black pepper, Sichuan pepper, butter, and radish. The boy wondered why radishes were used in Shaju cuisine. He needed to find some quickly, or he'd get into a fight. He picked up his bag and thought that it was very strange why Shaoxian was interested in Shaozan cuisine. As a child, he started getting diarrhea and vomiting after bringing food. The girl said that if the boy won, she would tell him, and he will answer her questions if he loses. Does the student agree to her conditions? She tried, no, it's strange, because just 2 weeks ago he was a punching bag. Meanwhile, the protagonist was already scanning her. Who is she? Who does she work for? Why is she interested in him? And why is she digging into Huang Shaoxian? The girl remarked that it was unlikely a person could change so much in such a short time, especially to use the long-forgotten martial arts of Country A. The main character was most interested in her eyes. He noticed that they were red. It was not just like that, and her eyes were like those of the inhabitants of Country N. He doesn't know why Shaoxian is interested in the girl. He shouldn't get too involved with her until he's done his own research. She asked if he planned to use ancient skills to strike. She asked him to demonstrate his skills the way she wanted to learn. The girl approached the boy and clenched her fist, trying to hit him in the face. But he dodged in time and noticed the very fast movements. He decided that he was too slow. She was also very strong, and he blocked her when she tried to hit him again. She, in turn, noticed that the boy had good reflexes. How had he gone from being a runt to his current level so quickly? She decided that he was a pretty good fighter and tried to hit him again. He also blocked with his fist and prepared to strike as he approached her. This girl's clean and precise movements and the power of each blow are like a splash of water. She, in turn, reflected on how calm he was, a very calm boy. He still held his ground under constant attack. She asked if they were really going to continue like this, and if he was going to stand and defend himself. The girl asked him to show off his skills. Shaoxian thought that her speed, strength, and skill were all excellent. The girl had undergone professional training and was a responsible soldier from Country N. She looked at him carefully and asked if he was really trying to achieve anything with those blocks. She remarked that guys like him made girls bored. Then the main character asked her to act and deftly dodged her blow. When he dodged, he put out his fist and tried to hit her with all his might. Then she asked the little boy if he really thought she would run into trouble. She asked him to let her feel his strength, and the boy tried to hit but missed. She couldn't understand how he so deftly dodged her powerful blow and looked at him in surprise. Then the boy pulled out some object and threw it towards the girl, looking menacingly at her. She did not expect such a turn of events and also looked in his direction, amazed. Suddenly he began to run away, having caught the moment when she switched from attack to defense and retreated. He dropped the hammer to escape her. He dodged, threw, picked up his belongings, and ran. Come to think of it, his backpack, hammer, and escape trajectory were all aligned. He'd wanted to avoid a fight from the start. She called him a brat and asked him to stop. How could some kid have fooled her? She exclaimed that she would catch him and find out everything. Then she noticed that he had returned and wondered if there really was a dead end there. The girl laughed and called the boy a little brat as she approached him. She found herself behind him, and throwing herself on his neck, asked if he really had decided to run away from her. He didn't expect such a turn of events when she grabbed him by the neck. When the girl laughed and asked if his plan had really failed, he should just try to get out of his current situation. The boy sensed the hoist technique, a unique combat technique used by the G-Country intelligence service called the Moonblade. It involves the opponent sitting on the shoulders and using their arms, chest, and hips to apply pressure on the target's neck. This technique requires an extremely high level of coordination of the opponent, his internal strength, endurance, physique, and physical qualities. And it is very difficult to control the combat technique. No one except the country's elite Dawn agents can use it because it breaks a person's neck in a second. It's a brutal and forbidden technique used primarily in contract killings. It's almost impossible to get out of it. And he's more than sure that this girl is from the Moonblade. So why is she following an ordinary student? Huang Shaoxian. He asked her to get off him immediately. Was he really admitting defeat? She had only just begun. Neither the bullying, nor the nudity, nor the mercenaries. None of it would have made him feel as depressed as he did now. Suddenly a guy appeared in front of them and looking at the main character asked who it was. The girl replied, looking at the boy, that this man was Huang Shaoxian's father. The boy explained that she was just a classmate. He asked her to let him go so he could resolve the situation, and she immediately giggled, calling herself Mona. 80 years ago, the first head of Country H, with the assistance of Country A, forcibly occupied 80,000 square kilometers of territory in the eastern part of Country EL and founded a state there. They believed they lived on divine land and that the territory had been founded since time immemorial, thanks to the sacred writings of the Lunar Flower cult. For decades, Country N continually invaded Country EL and persecuted its population. Despite the small size of the enemy, the people of the country never ceased their resistance. An army known as the Righteous Army was born from the flames of war. They gave their lives to defend the dignity of their homeland and succeeded in defeating the alliance of the countries of N and A. And now the countries of N and EL are in a deadlock, like Spark and Moonblade. Before us is a former Spark senior instructor and a former Moonblade agent. Meanwhile, the parents sat at the set table and looked at each other with questioning glances. Mona devoured the food and glanced at her parents, blushing slightly. The man apologized, saying they hadn't prepared properly and hadn't known she was coming. They weren't sure if she'd like today's dish. Her mother said it was her first time cooking Shazhou cuisine, and she didn't expect Shaxian's girlfriend to join them for dinner. She was very nervous about it. Mona asked not to worry. Their presentation was so good that, as a native of Country Inn, she couldn't find anything objectionable about it. She never would have thought she'd be able to taste such delicious dishes outside her homeland. The mother asked if she was telling the truth and exclaimed that she had calmed down by asking her to eat more. The man, on the other hand, asked his wife not to be so easily fooled. Since she is Miss Mona from Country Inn, she had to work hard to settle down abroad. And to be honest, he's a little curious about how she met their son, and he never mentioned that he has a girlfriend. He himself was extremely curious, since of course no one knows about his reincarnation, so why did this organization become interested in him? The girl said that without looking back, she realized it was fate. It was the summer break of her senior year of high school, and she happened to wander into the gallery. One painting caught her eye, and it was a landscape of Country A. At that moment, she decided to move to Country A to see it for herself. Later, when she had already begun her studies in that country, she visited the art museum on campus and came across the painting again. She recognized it immediately. But when she realized it was the original, she was shocked. The artist turned out to be a first-year student at Mountain Hawk Academy, Huang Shaoxian. The mother mentioned that her son had drawn this picture in his second year of high school. The boy laughed and said that it was thanks to this painting that he was accepted into the Mountain Hawk Academy. Mona couldn't believe the artist was a boy her age. Shaoxian has been a true talent since childhood. The protagonist considered the possibility that his reincarnation had indeed become known. But that was probably nonsense. In that case, he would have been immediately killed because he was number one on their list. Mona said that upon leaving the museum, she immediately found Shaoxian's class, expressed her admiration for him, and they became friends. There's a good chance her target isn't him, but Huang Shaoxian. But why would people from a special organization be interested in an ordinary student? The boy's mother remarked that it all turned out that way, and that fate was simply wonderful. In truth, she'd always been worried that girls didn't like Shaoxian. Mona asked what she was saying, and replied that Shaoxian was a good man. You hardly find guys as talented and gentle as him these days. Shaoxian wondered how the conversations always revolved around Huang Shaovan and what she was investigating. Could he possibly have a secret identity? The mother looked at the girl and said that they had previously been worried for a long time about his gentle temperament. Lately, he'd been coming home with injuries constantly, but he attributed it to his military training. She asked if he was being bullied at the academy. The girl was surprised his family didn't know about his abilities. She told his parents he was very strong and had recently touched a few boys. She decided not to turn him in. Shaoxian would have calmed down a bit, and it was good that she had a sensitive perception of murder. The girl explained that the boy had captivated them with his tenderness, and now they were friends. But perhaps she was imagining it. And how could an academy student have a powerful killer aura? She'd only seen such a powerful aura once in her life, and it simply couldn't be found in an ordinary student. Shaoxian considered the possibility that her goal was to investigate Huang Shaoxuan, but it couldn't be ruled out that she might be digging into him. Moonblades were too predictable, and he needed to test her. The woman leaned over to the girl and asked her not to lie to her. She asked if it was true that their son had made friends at the academy. The boy thought this was a real headache, and it was time to end it. He seemed to have lost his grip and couldn't believe he'd been caught so easily. The mother asked if she was telling the truth and said it was simply wonderful and that it had lifted her heart. Then the mother asked who her son's best friend was and what kind of person he was. Mona explained that his name was Qin Tian and that he was very educated. Then her mother asked her to invite him to their next dinner party, and she would prepare many special dishes. The girl replied that she was afraid it wouldn't work out because he had recently been seriously injured in a fight with his classmates and was now in the hospital. Shaoxian decided he couldn't continue in this vein. He told his parents they'd already eaten and that Mona had never visited them before, so it would be impolite to bombard her with questions. They might scare her off, and they'd be better off going out to chat or take a walk. The girl became angry and asked if he intended to drive her away. Apparently, he was afraid she would reveal his secret. Meanwhile, the parents looked at each other carefully and the father and mother got up from the table. They explained that they were going to go out and asked Shaxian to take proper care of the girl. His mother asked Mona to visit them more often and make herself at home. The boy was glad that they were finally gone and he could relax while Huang Shouyin's parents were away. Mona told him that people with a lot of skeletons in their closets arouse great curiosity. The boy replied that this was the man who had appeared and entered her house inexplicably. They finished with dinner. They finished with his circus, so he asks her to get out and not be ignorant. Mona exclaimed that he was very rude, but she was still a fan of his work. It's understandable why girls don't like him. Shaxian asked her to stop pretending and telling him who sent her, and for what purpose. Then maybe he'd answer her questions. Mona asked who among them was proficient in martial arts but pretending to be weak. His family is wealthy and can afford to buy paintings. The parents watched the newlyweds and noticed that as soon as they left, they immediately began kissing. The mother replied that their son seemed to have grown up overnight, and she had a strange premonition. He was her father after all, and he should tell his child. Time was running out, and she needed to get the information out of her as quickly as possible. Mona asked if he was upset and if he wasn't her rival. Suddenly the father called his son, looking at him from the second floor, and asked him to come to him. The boy decided he'd had enough of wasting his time. His father asked him to act quickly and not keep the girl waiting. He handed him the money and said that he and his mother had prepared it for Mona. He asked her to give it to her later with his best wishes. The main character was very surprised because they had already begun to treat her as a daughter-in-law. The father asked me not to forget to open it and see what was there for him. The girl looked up intently, curious about what they were whispering about. It was a shame she couldn't lip read. But suddenly she looked closely at the envelope and thought about the tradition of country. When a guy introduces a girl to his parents for the first time, they give her an envelope filled with money as a gift for the meeting. Who would have thought she'd get overtime? And country A is truly deservedly considered the epitome of etiquette. When my father said he and my mother would be returning home, he asked her not to worry and promised to take good care of her. He wouldn't even need to be polite. The boy called Mona and asked her not to even look at the red envelope. There's a saying in Shazhou, if you want to hunt a tiger, take a pack of hyenas with you. The girl got really angry and told the boy that the money was meant for her. Then he asked her if she really thought that. The money was a gift from his parents to his girlfriend, and she wasn't his girlfriend. Then she asked him if he wanted to take her out and let her trust that she wouldn't fall for him like Liu Lian. The boy decided that before the hunt, he needed to test the bite strength of his hyenas. He doesn't know if she's going to pull out her country end scripture from her pocket and declare that he's her boyfriend. He asks the girl to show her true face. After all, they have been parasitizing on foreign territory for decades, and still adhere to the cult of expanding their so-called God-given land. Suddenly the girl had a cold, sharp object in her hands and began to approach the boy. With a very deft movement, she was already next to him and brought the cold weapon closer to his neck. Shaxian immediately grabbed the blade with his hand and said that something was wrong and that it was one of the moon blades. The girl called him names and exclaimed that his tongue was too long. Since childhood, he was engaged in military training in Shazhuan, the so-called meat grinder. His perception of danger and murderous intent is never wrong. Country N combines political and religious worldviews. Its inhabitants are followers of the cult of the Luna Inflorescence, including agents of the Luna Blade. Over the course of many years, he researched this organization and came to the conclusion that all its members, up to the third generation, were religious fanatics. And the woman standing in front of him, as he understands, has no intention of killing. When he insulted her country and their moon Bible, considered sacred by the cult, she remained unperturbed. She told the boy she didn't know what he was planning, but he'd better back off before it was too late. She won't tease him anymore, and she thanks him for brightening up her little sister's dull days. Shaoxian decided he could be completely sure of her identity, but the fact that she wasn't a cult follower was a fact. He asked if she would tell him why she was following him. Mona replied that if he knew too much, he would have trouble sleeping. The girl turned towards the main character and, smiling, said that they would see each other again. Shaoxian decided it was too presumptuous to assume she was a Moonblade agent just because she'd taken Talfor. It was possible that other units had learned Moonblade combat techniques, and he'd simply been confused by her red eyes. But he can't relax, and now he has people he must protect. He installed an automatic alarm that calls the police every 40 minutes. They would have come, but for the girl. The boy asked the Neanus's assistant to upload the video and restart the timer. He was currently too weak, and such a precaution was necessary. The voice print verification was successful. The recording was uploaded to the private cloud, and the automatic alarm was triggered. The protagonist decided that he was not in real danger until his true identity was revealed. It doesn't matter whether she's from the Moonblade or some other organization, Huang Shaxian's mediocrity plays into his hands. This is the best cover at the moment, and while he has it, he will be able to improve, gather information, and fulfill his dying wish. The boy decided to start working on it immediately, and his current main asset is his experience and foresight from his previous life. This girl's presence can't be ignored, and it's not just her overconfidence. She's collecting information about him for a compelling reason, and she won't stop there. Could their next meeting really be fatal? He decided to prepare thoroughly for the following evening, and the girl, in turn, walked along the road and thought about the secrets that this boy was hiding. She was very interested and curious, and she hoped he wouldn't be upset if she opened the red envelope. It felt very thick, and they certainly didn't skimp on it. She pulled something red out of the envelope. When she pulled out the package, it contained disposable condoms, and she was simply shocked. Before us stretched the wide 26th district, the western slums, and a huge, clean ring. Two guys were already engaged in a real fight. One hit the other very hard, and he already had a large hematoma on his eye. The guy who was being beaten decided that he simply couldn't and wouldn't last through this fight to the end. The strength of this monster is simply great, and he continued to mock the boy by beating him. He is like a toy to him, and he will not be able to resist this monster for long. Meanwhile, the boy approached some door and had an object in his hands. The man who was being beaten very badly opened his eyes and realized that he was saved. Then his opponent who beat him so badly called him a lucky bastard. The guy thought about it, holding his throat, that he could not lose and could not fall here. The man called out to Amin, and he immediately turned to Mr. Jan. Mr. Jan looked at him closely and asked him to give him the pill since he agreed to it. Amin smiled, looked at his friend, and replied that he would do everything right away. Several round red pills immediately appeared in the guy's hand. He handed them to his boss, who dumped the pills into his mouth and swallowed them. As he approached the enemy, he became thoughtful. He took a closer look at him and decided that this guy looked completely different now. Even the color of his eyes changed, and his muscles seemed to grow and fill out. The enemy drew his eyebrows closer to his nose and looked at him carefully, noticing the speed. The speed was incredible, and he tried to hit him, but the guy blocked it. It was as if he was completely on fire in fury and kept hitting him repeatedly. The enemy had already begun to fly far back, and he broke his nose so hard that blood splattered all around. Then he grabbed him by the face with one hand and tried to push him far back. He dropped him right on the ring and continued to press his hand on his face with all his might. The enemy was already completely covered in blood, and only his eyes were visible through his fingers. Mr. Jan clenched his fist again and wanted to deliver the finishing blow to this man. When he clenched his fist, it came close to his face, and it was a fatal blow. The crowd watching this began to raise their hands and shout that this was very good. Meanwhile, a man named Zhang Huizhong said that the red pills worked wonders. He asked for a shipment to be sent from today, as the red pills would begin being distributed in the west of the city. The man told the gentleman that it was Desheng territory. Then Mr. Jiang, without taking the cigarette out of his mouth, smiled and said that everyone has their weaknesses, and Qin Sheng is no exception. Meanwhile, the boy held the phone in his hands and answered the call to his boss. He said he was right, and that these were indeed red pills. The boxer accepted them, and as a result achieved an incredible victory. There was a suspicion that the match was fixed. The boss immediately realized it and hung up. Ashen stood on a high floor and looked at the city at night. They turned to the gentleman and told him that his father and sister were already waiting for him, and he replied that he was already on his way. The man turned to Ashen and asked if he had finished his business. Ashen immediately appeared in the room and, apologizing, replied that he had not yet dealt with everyone. The man asked not to worry, as he was already overloaded with work, and the busier he was, the more rest he needed. Qin Desheng, founder of the company, is the chairman of the board of directors. The boy straightened his tie and, smiling, told his father that this was too much. The woman sitting across from him asked him not to make a fool of himself. The whole family had arrived at the headquarters, and he had some unresolved business. Qin Xiaoyang, the second daughter of the Qin family, is the president of Jiaoyang Company. Wouldn't it be more convenient to work from the main office? Ashen replied that they'd better get down to business. He needs them to open a business in the west of the city for a while and move there. Qin Xiaoyang asked Qin Sheng what he was saying. Her casino in the western district had just been busted, and he was demanding she go back there. Qin Desheng, holding a cigarette, asked his son if he wanted to go against the Jiang family. Sheng replied that he didn't exactly want to, but they had to be prepared. Red pills had appeared in the western district, and they knew nothing about it until they investigated. Qin Xiaoyang asked if these were the same drugs that had become popular on the southern coast, and that they were said to be really strong. Moreover, they're also very addictive, and according to legend, they were created from a military psychotropic drug in Country N. They put a great strain on the brain, nerves, and heart, and because of their powerful effectiveness, addicts flock to them. They fuel a deadly addiction, with profits reaching up to 600%, making it a veritable goldmine for drug dealers. The girl was very surprised when she heard these figures. The law of District 26 states that drugs are off limits, regardless of profit. They decided to discuss the details after dinner, as today's beef was burnt and they needed to chew slowly. Ashen's father asked where Xiao Tian was and why he hadn't come. The boy replied that his mother had said he wasn't feeling well and was resting. But why didn't he tell him anything about this, and was the boy okay? Ashen told his father that some young men don't change and asked his father not to worry. Meanwhile, the guy was in the room with the other guys and had a plaster cast on his neck. The guy called them worthless, and they were all beaten by one man. They are complete and utter losers. He called this guy a fatso and said he weighed 200 kilograms. He could easily sit on him and crush him. And why would he even be wearing a collar? They can't handle one boy altogether, and he scatters them like kittens. The guy kept calling them worthless, stupid cretins. It was even more profitable to keep a dog than them. Suddenly a guy appeared holding a cigarette in his teeth and asked why he was swearing so much. At this rate, he could tear his establishment apart brick by brick. Could he really be dissatisfied with the service? It was Mr. Jiang in front of him, and when Xiao Tian saw him, he was covered in beads of sweat. The man sat down next to the boy and asked what kind of master he was. He'd known him since he was a baby. Xiao Tian responded by calling him Brother Jiang, and the man asked him to tell him what had happened. The guy started explaining that he asked these parasites to deal with one brat, but they didn't succeed, and he was very angry with them. Mr. Jiang immediately hugged the boy and asked what was wrong. If it didn't work the first time, it would work the second. No matter how strong he was still only a mortal. Meanwhile, Mr. Jiang's employee asked them to watch and turned on the screen with the battle. Today, an underground boxing championship match took place, and one person was killed. The potential favorite, Chatsai, was beaten to death. When the guy asked Mr. Jiang if he had really been killed, he confirmed that he had been beaten to death by some no-name. Well, how is this possible? Chatsai is a demon in the flesh, and he is the first champion boxer in the country. The man replied that the impossible is possible, especially when you have the opportunity. Meanwhile, the guys were moving along the road and the boy was heading off to do his business. One of the girls asked who this guy was, and the second replied that she didn't know. But he was handsome and maybe he was an athlete. Then the girl said that it couldn't be because she knew all the athletes at the academy, and it was as if they had escaped from a zoo. But it's strange to her, because she feels like she's seen him somewhere. The boy was walking down the corridor, and in front of him, there were some guys who blocked his path. These were the guys who were beaten by the main character, and they stared at him with an angry look. Shaxian grabbed his backpack with one hand and said sadly that this was just mortal boredom. It seems Liu Lian took a real beating, specifically his neck. The guy asked Shaxian not to laugh and that today he would personally rip off all his limbs. The girl said that this was Qin Tian's top henchman, Liu Lian's brother. The second girl suddenly exclaimed that she remembered Qin Tian had also bullied Shaxian, forcing him to eat a burger. Then the boy asked if he'd nearly had all his limbs torn off yesterday and anything that wasn't hanging loose, or if he'd come today for more. And how long would this go on? Perhaps he had some strange fetish. Liulian became very angry and shouted, while raising his fists, that he would not leave a single wet spot on him. The boys all clenched their fists and began to approach the main character to strike. But the boy very deftly dodged and put up blocks, fighting off the villains. The guys continued to approach the main character, attacking him from all sides. Shaxian realized that the front and rear escape routes were blocked. Such a small space was not suitable for fighting, and he decided to change his plan of attack. Suddenly the boy began to jump, approaching the window and running away from them. One of the boys exclaimed that they couldn't let him escape, and that they had to catch up with him immediately. One of them was already on the other side of the corridor and asked where the little rascal was going. The main character's eyes glowed a bright, bloody color like a vampire's. He approached his opponent, and with a lightning-fast blow knocked him to the floor. The rest of this scoundrel's comrades were already running to help their friend with their fists outstretched for blows. But the main character put his hand forward in time and performed a move by inserting his fingers into the eyes. The guy screamed very loudly in pain, and streams of scarlet blood spurted from his eyes. Then the boy started running away as quickly as possible and ran into a large room. He was in one of the classrooms, and his opponent had already come running towards him. He wanted to hit him, but the boy blocked it and put an iron knuckle duster on his other hand. Before he could even get close to him, he had already hit him with all his might in the body. The same thing happened to the next boy, and Liu Lian became interested in what was going on. He started to leave the room and his comrade was already running towards him. The comrade ran away from the main character and he was already next to Liu Lian and put his fist in front of him. A powerful blow flew straight into his fat, insolent face and blood splattered around. The fat man immediately turned over and began to fly far back, falling on his back. The main character asked him why they were creating problems for him. All he wanted was to study, draw, and enjoy a quiet life. But they bullied him day after day and it was just terrible and unfair. It is necessary to maintain the image of a strong person in front of students in order to avoid trouble in the future. The boy said, looking at Liu Lian, that he hoped this would not happen again and that they would stop bullying him. Before he could finish speaking, the fat man had already risen from his knees and began to approach him, sticking out his fist. The protagonist looked at him carefully and decided that he had approached very quickly. He immediately put up a block in front of the villain and tried to parry the powerful blow. But the boy could not understand where his strength and agility came from, and his eyes lit up with a fiery light. It was very strange, and he just had a feeling of something familiar. When the fat man leaned back and stood in a stance, he began to approach him again. He started with a straight punch with his right fist, just like the last time. The guy tried to hit him, and the main character dodged in time because the blow would have hit him right in the face. The boy realized, looking at him, that he had unexpectedly changed his blow, which surprised him greatly. Several days have passed since the last skirmish, and how did he manage to improve his skills in such a short time? Shaxian couldn't understand at all what had happened to this fat man and where he got so much strength from. The guy took the desk that was standing nearby and with one deft movement broke it into several pieces. Shaxian decided that luckily this guy had miscalculated a bit, since he was scanning him. This body has developed resistance to impacts. It is difficult to say what will happen next. Liu Lian began to approach the boy again and, clenching his fists, was already close. The protagonist continued to scan him and watch what was happening while dodging. He noticed the speed had increased again. The technique was the same, but it was much faster. There was clearly something wrong with this guy, and it needed to be finished quickly, so he moved in with another blow. The guy had a knuckle duster on his hand, and he hit him in the face with all his might. Liu Lian's face twisted into a malicious grin, and scarlet streams of blood began to flow out of his mouth. Then the boy tried to hit him again, but he hit him right in the back with his knee. Shaxian approached him and noticed the red steam emanating from him. He also noticed a pungent odor. And when it hit him, the boy realized he'd been a bit distracted. Shaxian's body was still too weak, and his strength, endurance, and reflexes were diminished in moments of extreme exhaustion. Insight, or the kisses of the moon goddess, originated in the country of N as a secret injection for special operations. It temporarily enhances physical characteristics and spurred on fierce combat. After drinking, the eyes take on a terrifying appearance, earning this condition the nickname clairvoyance. He decided he couldn't delay any longer, and the constant, intense attacks exhausted his body. It's practically impossible to move, and besides, he took a strong blow. He's likely broken several ribs, and at this rate, he'll die before he loses sight. That's because he's in a hurry and doesn't have a trained body anymore. The protagonist decided to train this body, and fortunately, things aren't so bad. In this world, no one but him knows the weaknesses of the insight injection. Improved combat ability efficiency is both an advantage and a disadvantage of insight. The guy continued to dodge the blows and try to land another strong blow on the fat man. Contempt increases the body's pain tolerance, which is why it is so strong in battle. To get rid of the fear of the enemy, the fat man began to approach the boy again, and his gaze was very frightening. The eyes glowed with a bright, fiery light, and the veins were engorged, and it looked very creepy. However, over time, the feeling of pain will intensify endlessly until it disappears. This leads to a loss of self-preservation, an important aspect of combat. The goal of the duel is to win by using all means to kill the opponent while preserving one's own life. If you strike the enemy in the back where his heart is, you can cause cardiac arrest. The main character did just that and snuck up from behind, hitting him on the back with all his might. The guy began to fall to his knees, after which he sprawled face down on the floor. The main character was covered in beads of sweat because everything worked, but he had exhausted all his strength. The boy couldn't understand how long it lasted, but he really wanted to sleep. The man in camouflage hit the boy in the face with all his might, and blood spurted from his mouth. When the boy got hit in the face, he grimaced and thought that these were bad people. He continued to fight with these scoundrels and took out a cold weapon as he approached his opponents. He waved his knife and approached the man in camouflage uniform, who continued to think. The boy thought that they didn't even understand and had been exhausted for a long time. The guy in camouflage uniform pulled out his knife and approached his opponent. When he took out a knife, he tried to hit him on the head, but he defended himself with his hand, and the knife stuck into his hand. At that time, the man in camouflage uniform thought that pain did not exist. He had a very strange feeling, as if he was fighting robots. The man in camouflage tried to defend himself from new knife blows by blocking them. He kept pushing the weapon away with his hands and couldn't understand what was happening. Suddenly, a bright beam approached the head of the enemy, who was holding the man in shape. The guy walked up to him and he held a gun in his hands, getting closer and closer, faster and faster. The guy who was holding the gun approached his friend and asked Mu Ye if he was okay. There's something wrong with them, and they're much stronger than last time. Someone asked if he could handle the moon dogs who ate their fill of epiphany alone. That's true, but recently the enemy has developed a psychotropic drug that allows the user to use energy beyond acceptable limits. Suddenly the guy stuck a knife in his back, and this will probably be the last straw. His eyes glowed with a bright bloody light, and he came closer and closer. The boy realized upon opening his eyes that it was a dream. Beads of sweat were running down his face. Meanwhile, the man asked if this was their answer, and whether they were making a mountain out of a molehill. His son was definitely a victim. People shouted that they were against it, and that the students responsible should come out and apologize for the bullying. The man asked Mr. Huang and Mrs. Huang to calm down. They had already dealt with the boys involved in the incident. They considered it an explanation to student Huang. If they continue to quarrel in the same spirit, they will not bring anything good either to their son or to themselves. There are two types of students at Mountain Hawk Academy, those with excellent grades and those with influential parents. The mother asked if this explained their son's bullying. Or perhaps he was being bullied because of his family's low social status. Their son returns home covered in cuts and bruises, which he attributed to military training. They were again asked to calm down, and they understand the situation. Their academy does bear a certain responsibility. On behalf of the school, he promises that no one will ever disturb student Huang Shaoxian again. If necessary, they can make an exception for him and transfer him to the first building of the Mountain Hawk Academy. In addition, they promise that after completing the training, student Huang will be given a quota to apply for a job at Yingshan Company without an interview. But the father asked if he should address the root of the problem, and whether they needed an explanation and an apology from the perpetrator. The mother asked if they even understood the psychological trauma they had inflicted on their son. The director thought about it when the man spoke about this, and said that they would apologize after the student woke up. The mother said again that it wasn't just him who should apologize, but these children too. These children should make a public apology. Meanwhile, the main character was lying in bed, and people appeared on the threshold. The boy said everything was fine, and that they'd started first, but that Ikki had been more seriously injured than he had. He was simply asking them to do as the academy suggested, and the director looked at him in surprise. The academy gave its word that Liu Lian and the other students would be punished, and nothing more was needed. For now, he simply wants to enjoy student life and not deepen the self-hatred. Otherwise, it will never end. Suddenly, a woman appeared on the threshold and told the respected people that this was a hospital ward and what kind of a bazaar they were making here, since the patient was very weak and needed rest. The girl who entered the room immediately kicked everyone out and closed the door behind her. She entered the room and saw a boy sitting on a hospital bed. Shaoxian raised his head and said that everyone had already left a long time ago, and she did not need to pretend. The girl didn't expect the boy to call her by her name so quickly, revealing it and calling it amazing. She asked him how he liked her new look. Shaoxian thought he wouldn't have recognized her if she hadn't deliberately changed her voice and intonation. The boy asked why she had come at all. Mona adjusted her glasses and said with tears in her eyes that she hadn't seen him for a whole week, and he was so cold to her. Suddenly, the girl announced that she wasn't alone, and Shen walked into the room. He called her smart, and she said it was just her job. The protagonist looked closely at the boy and recognized him. He realized he had met him earlier than he expected. The young man greeted the student and said it was their first meeting and that his name was Qin Sheng. He was Qin Tian's older brother and the CEO of Daisheng Company. Qin Tian's older brother. He needed to get more information about her, since she was working for this man. The protagonist decided he still didn't know anything about her identity. Shen explained that he'd heard about the relationship between him and his younger brother, and had come only for this matter. It was a personal account he'd opened with 100,000 in it, and that was his personal compensation. He hoped that this would be the end of their relationship, that he wouldn't bother him again in the future, and that he would forget all the grievances. The boy looked at him intently in response. Suddenly looking him in the eye, he asked what would happen if he didn't accept. Shen replied that this was impossible and that he had forbidden his brother from coming home, so he would send him abroad in 3 months. After that, Miss Mona would tell him the password. Shaxian replied that even if he paid a high price for his silence, the hatred in his heart would remain. Shen told student Huang that he'd heard he had some resources, but he asked him not to show off. If he didn't want to do this for himself, he should think about his family. The boy wondered if he was threatening his parents. Well, he shouldn't worry. He'd definitely protect them. But he wasn't about to let Qin Tian go either. The boy finished speaking, said what he wanted, and said goodbye. He asked Miss Mona to take care of student Huan. Then when the door slammed, the girl wished him a good journey and waved her hand. After that, she turned to the main character and closing the door laughed. She said, taking off her robe, that they were alone and it was time to pay the bills. Then the boy asked her why she didn't leave the money and the password and leave. He promised not to tell anyone about it and asked her what she thought. Mona replied that they'd worked so hard to earn enough for their honeymoon, and all he needed from her was a bank card. The medical report indicated he had severe muscle damage. He needs someone who can take care of him, so she asks him to listen to her and have dinner with her. The boy asked what would happen if he gave her 10,000, and the girl paused. She asked what other twisted ideas he was putting forward. Did he really think she'd trade her boss's trust for 10,000? Shaxian replied that, as they say, money has no smell, or that he hadn't offered her enough. Suddenly, the boy turned to Miss Mona and offered to make a deal. If she fulfilled his request, he would hand over all the money on the card. Then the girl looked closely at the main character and said that she was listening to him. The sky was beautiful and blood red. The tall building seemed to rise to the very clouds. Someone was counting numbers and talking about the approach, continuing to repeat the same thing several times. The man jumped over the obstacle and said that this was the last barrier, after which he exclaimed, catching his breath, that this was the last time and that was it. The boy stood at the top of the building and looked at the pool below. The girl sat on the roof and watched him, a little bored and thoughtful. She mentioned that the guy had been training hard for 2.5 years and had achieved good results. She thought there would be a downpour on the first day. 2.5 months ago, Shaxian asked Miss Mona to make a deal with him. She would serve as his personal instructor for 3 months, after which she would receive 100,000 yuan. Meanwhile, the girl was very surprised but agreed. He asked for help in mastering specialized training in accordance with the specifications of the special forces. However, he had some additional conditions. Except for training, his personal life remains hers. The girl laughed and asked if he thought she'd trust him so easily, and what if she suddenly got involved with Qin Tian? She didn't want to lose her job because of him. The protagonist explained that it was okay and they would take an oath. She had to scan his QR code from her phone. Then Miss Mona listened carefully to the boy and took out her phone. He explained that only in this case she would be calm, so he agreed to it. When the girl picked up the phone, her expression changed and she decided he'd slandered himself. She asked him if he wasn't afraid she'd run off with the money when she got it. Shen said the card was created using his details and no one could withdraw money from it without him. She wondered what this guy was up to and whether he was trying to take matters into his own hands. She decided, looking at him, that he didn't look like a brainless person and that he probably had some kind of plan. The protagonist asked if they were finished and asked for another training session. He was dissatisfied with his current reflexes. Mona asked if he dared give her orders, considering she was his instructor. Special training needs to be learned gradually, and his intensity is already higher than that of regular soldiers. While the pain of torn muscles is possible, the damage caused by the injury is real. There's a common idiom in their East, curb your pride. Shaxian asked him not to talk nonsense, as he knew his business inside and out, and asked him to continue. Mona gathered her hair and said, looking into his eyes, that he was certainly good at chatting. However, there's an ancient saying that describes people like him. Don't put the cart before the horse. The girl approached him and tried to punch him, but he dodged very quickly. She tried to strike again, and he again dodged deftly and very skillfully. The girl, watching what was happening, thought that the guy was doing well. The training continued, and she again tried to kick him with all her might. Shaxian thought that the strength and speed were getting faster and faster each time. There is still a big gap between their physical fitness levels, and he must outsmart her. There is one way to win when you can barely stand on your feet, and the boy grabbed her leg. When he made this gesture, the girl threw a questioning glance at him. She tried to dodge, but he grabbed her very tightly and she thought about it. Just when he'd mastered fighting horizontally, she immediately tried to land a move on him. Her incredibly fast reaction time instantly immobilized his head. The protagonist decided that in order to perform a takeover from behind, he needed to free himself and sit on top. But this wasn't so easy to do. Mona called him a kid and asked how many more tricks he had up his sleeve. Last time it was kickboxing and Jeet Kune Do. Now it's ground fighting, and what's next? And by the way, who taught him these techniques? And did he really steal some secret book on martial arts? Does he know he's just like a character from some manga? Maybe he's moved into another body. When Mona was seeing him, the boy's phone rang and she asked if he would answer. The protagonist replied that of course he would answer, and the girl exclaimed that this time the victory was hers. But the boy told her not to even dream about it and immediately began to answer the call. He received a call from some very rude guy who insulted him and called himself Chin Tien. Could it really be him? And before taking refuge in Country B, he wants to give him a dressing down? He was worried he wouldn't be able to find him, but he turned up right at his door. Who does he think he is? And let him not think he's strong just because he managed to beat up Liu Lian. He's just a dog who can sneak up on you. The guy asked him in response, why is he so mad with helplessness? He could knock out dozens of his kind with just his left hand. Then the scoundrel exclaimed that he would beg forgiveness on his knees. The main character asked if he was serious, and if he could convey all this only over the phone. Then the enemy became even more angry, and exclaimed that he would kill him, and arranged a meeting today at 10 at the port of Hongsan. He said rudely into the phone that they should come to the meeting only the two of them, and that he wouldn't be too chicken to come alone. Shaxian smiled and replied that he would come alone without any problem and said goodbye. It's just great. The time has finally come for Huang Shokan to sort things out and put an end to the skirmish with the mad dog. Suddenly the boy's phone rang, and his father asked why he wasn't home yet. Shaxian replied that he had some business to attend to, and that they could have dinner without him. To which his father said he was overreacting. He leaves every day early in the morning and returns only late in the evening, and what does he do there? If he hadn't left his dirty clothes behind, he would have thought he was dead. If he even had a conscience. The boy replied that he really did have things to do today. The relationship really doesn't work out, because they are not his real parents, and in fact, he is going to take revenge for their son. The girl approached the protagonist and said she thought he'd just been scolded. The boy replied that it was impolite to eavesdrop on other people's conversations. Mona smiled and said that she would not take today's training day into account so that her aunt and uncle would not worry. There were only 15 days left. No more, no less. The girl asked me not to put pressure on her head. She called him a tomboy and said he had plenty of time. Was it really that hard for him to spend at least one day with his family? Shaxian replied that it was not her concern, and she asked him to be at least sometimes honest with his family. Stop keeping everything to yourself and putting on a mask of indifference, acting like an old man. After all, they gave him life, and he needs to appreciate it before he loses it. Shaozan replied to Mona that she liked to meddle in other people's business. Shaxian, he said as he entered the room, that he was already home. His mother exclaimed that he was on time and that she had just set the table. The guy looked at the time and said that there was still plenty of time until 10 o'clock. And is it really Shazhou cuisine today? Mom replied that Dad said he'd be coming for dinner today, so she decided to cook his favorite. He didn't know what to say and exclaimed that it was just great. The parents wished their son a bon appetit, and the father asked what he was doing and why he was reaching for food with unwashed hands. Or maybe he should be reminded of the rules of table manners. Shaxton thought about how his father had such a bad temper that he hadn't noticed what had bitten him. The mother turned to her husband and said that it wasn't scary and that he had simply forgotten, since they rarely ate together anyway. The boy couldn't understand what he was trying to achieve and had a bad feeling about what was going to happen. The man responded by blaming his poor upbringing on him. Then she asked him to tell her about it. This is one of the unpleasant aspects of reincarnation, and quarrels can break out for no apparent reason. This is, of course, his first reincarnation. They've been somewhat erased from his past life. However, strangely, his memories often fade. Perhaps it's not his multiple sclerosis, but the fact that he lives in this body. And they say, memory is the meaning of human existence. He must do everything in his power. The mother looked at her son and asked how his cooking was today. The boy smiled, continued eating, and told his mother that it was simply delicious. She said with a smile that she was very happy and asked him to eat while his mother prepared his favorite dishes. Shaxian said he was wolfing it down and it was simply delicious. She wondered if it was because she'd added the cilantro, the soul of the East. Suddenly my father asked me what kind of business he had, and that every morning he leaves at 6 in the morning and doesn't return until 10 in the evening. The boy understood what was going on and explained that he had signed up for an individual program at a training camp and was training his body. Then my father asked if he was lying and if he really only disappeared during training. Shaxian lowered his head and closed his eyes, thinking that the most annoying thing is when people start playing guessing games. The father handed over his report card and said that his grades for last semester had arrived today and that he should look at them himself. This was the worst grade among all my classmates. The boy laughed and asked if they were still sending out receipts like this. My father sadly remarked that he even got a terrible grade in art, and beyond that, he doesn't attend any classes at all. Or maybe it was sent by mistake, but why should he worry about that? The father asked his son to tell him honestly whether he was in a gang and looked at him carefully. The boy didn't expect such a turn of events, and he became curious about what he was talking about. The mother also looked at her husband and asked in surprise what he had just said. The father suddenly put the brass knuckles on the table and exclaimed that he found them in his dirty clothes. The mother also asked her son what it was. Shaoxin wondered if that was why he couldn't find it. It turned out he was in dirty laundry. The boy broke out in beads of sweat and decided that he couldn't blatantly lie to them. The parents couldn't understand what was going on here, and their son couldn't really explain it. When his phone rang, his father closed his eyes and said that he should turn off the phone while eating. Shaxian thought that whoever it was, he was grateful to him, and told his parents to turn off their phones after reading it. When he opened the message, he wished he hadn't looked. His mother asked who the girl was. The father thought that his son was just some kind of loser and was talking about something that didn't matter. Suddenly he became very angry and started shouting at him very rudely. He approached him and asked him to see what he looked like. His mouth was full of rudeness and curses. Was this why he sent him to an elite academy? Was it so he could learn this? Shaxian asked him not to worry and to listen. He asked them not to shut him up and asked if he thought he knew nothing. He'd been asking around at the academy about Mona, and no one had any idea who she was. While Qin Tian was his so-called good friend, he's the third son of the Daishin gang leader. Shaoxin asked to listen, and he promised to explain everything to him. That girl was talking complete nonsense, and she was actually Qin Tian. Well, his father asked him to stop arguing. Does he really think that his father is a fool? And from the smell of cigarettes that comes from him, he is sure that he has long since gone down the slippery slope and has kept his mouth shut all day. But is his sandbar really about becoming a bandit? He wants to get somewhere because it will allow him to join a gang. He wants to kill everyone indiscriminately like an uncivilized savage. And if he knew that it would lead to this, he would never have allowed such a son to be born. The mother wanted to stop her husband, but he asked her what was that wild look and what he had said wrong. The protagonist remembered how Mona told him that they gave him life, so he should learn to appreciate it before he lost it. He immediately got up from the table and started walking toward the door. His mother asked where he was going. The boy replied that he had already eaten his fill, and his father asked his wife to leave him alone because he was no longer a child and to let him do whatever he wanted. A second life has become a second chance for him, but now he's connected to those who aren't his. He has one last chance to avenge the death of their son. After that, he would repay this body for saving his life and be able to breathe a sigh of relief. He searched among the hieroglyphs and finally found it. A strange language and so many Almaphorians. In Shizhou they say, "Don't wait for the storm to pass. Learn to dance in the rain and fight fire with fire." The boy was in full gear and had a mask on his face. The guy asked Aaron if he thought they'd get promoted after this, since he didn't want to be stuck in this prison anymore. He'd heard that the senior guys at headquarters ate spicy food every day and made out with girls. He heard there would be big changes up there. So the boy asked how big they would be, and if they would really be the same as the 8th Masters. The guy laughed and asked what else one should live for. In his opinion, a woman would be more practical than money. Then the comrade replied that it was clear why he was nicknamed a worm in the sense of a spermatozoon. He told his friend that he didn't understand anything, and that a man like him was rare. But it's just a knife fight, and work is work. The masked guy noticed that their vigilance was non-existent, even though it was quite noisy here. Qin Tian should have expected guys from an ambush. And could these really be his brother Qin Sheng's gangsters? It doesn't matter. And with his experience, laying them out separately won't be any trouble. The boy looked closely and thought that he would kill Qin Tian, and everything would be fine. Suddenly something started to make noise in his ear, and the boy listened carefully and looked ahead. He was a little surprised and wondered what kind of sound it was. The boy began to peer into the darkness, and when he saw a shadow, he asked who it was. Meanwhile, there was a girl on a motorcycle who stopped in front of the two guys. The guys looked at her carefully and asked her to immediately answer who she was. The girl got off the motorcycle, and she was dressed in overalls and a helmet that was on her head. The guys asked her to stay put and ask where this girl had come from. Was she really lost? The guy asked her to get lost until he explained the road clearly. He asked if she had swallowed her tongue, or if she was simply too stupid. He asked her to raise her hands up and immediately fall on her knees in front of them. Well, before he could finish speaking, the girl raised her leg up and hit him on the chin with all her might. Then she pushed him aside, turned over, and found herself on her feet again. The girl continued to beat these guys one after another with her feet and hands, hitting them on the head. Then she made another serious move, and the guys flew off in different directions. Then one of them called her a name and, in anger, gritted his teeth as he looked at his comrades lying on the ground. Then the girl paused, observing those she had just attacked. Could it really be her, and what on earth is she doing here? The protagonist wondered as he watched the scene unfold. Didn't she work for Qin Tian, and how would she fight her own people? Meanwhile, one of the guys was already running up to her, clenching his fists and starting to approach. The girl was already ready and clenched her fists, awaiting the attack. The guy had already approached her, and she tried to perform a move by throwing him to the ground. The girl very deftly lifted him straight onto his back and then began to tip him over. Suddenly, someone appeared behind her and clenched his fist and wanted to hit her right on the head. She felt him approaching and kicked him as hard as she could, right on the chin. Then another guy appeared who took a heavy piece of iron in his hands and wanted to hit her on the back. The girl unexpectedly dodged this blow, and another opponent appeared behind her. She saw this enemy too, and turning towards him, grabbed him with all her strength. She flipped over another scoundrel who began to fall to the ground with a scream. The girl jumped up again and made a move on the scoundrel who had snuck up from behind. Then she jumped as high as she could above his head and hit him even harder. The guys were simply shocked when they watched what was happening, and the girl stood with her feet on this guy. The girl turned towards the guys and asked if they called themselves gangsters. She beckoned to them with her hand and asked if they wanted to get up, angering the rascals even more. Then the rest, when they got up from the floor, grabbed iron bats and began to approach the girl. They ran up to her from different sides, and she started performing techniques, waving them off. She turned the boys over one after another and they threw away their iron pieces. She approached each one, trying to knock them out before they could harm her. When the next scoundrel approached the girl, she turned him over with one hand, hitting him on the head. The next blow hit two more people in the face so hard that blood splattered all around. They grabbed their noses with their hands and were simply shocked by what was happening. The guys decided to use the pills, and a reddish haze lit up the air, enveloping them. They became much stronger, and approaching the girl, tried to attack her again. She was already making a move on one of the guys when another one started approaching from the other side. There were many of them, and they became much stronger. But the girl continued to perform her moves. The next blow flew at the villain, who was already right next to her. The protagonist, observing her movements, realized it was an epiphany. But isn't epiphany a special drug for the country of N? The boy became curious about where it came from here, and whether it had now spread everywhere. The girl continued to attack her opponents, who were wielding iron clubs. When she attempted to kick him, the man grabbed her leg with both hands. Then he raised the iron bat as high as he could, and screaming "Die" was about to strike. He didn't have time to do so, as the protagonist had already appeared nearby, saving the girl from the villains. The girl looked carefully at a man who was wearing a cap and a mask. She was just hanging by her legs on the neck of one of her opponents, and she asked who else he was. She asked to answer right now, otherwise she would stop being polite. But another opponent had already appeared behind her with an iron bat in his hands and asked her to say goodbye to her life. When the main character was asked who he was, he said that he was just passing by. He hit the bastard with the bat with all his might, and he rolled over and screamed. The guy with the bat continued to approach the girl and, shouting, "I'll kill you," lifted her as high as he could above his head. Meanwhile, the main character, observing what was happening, decided to neutralize the opponents as quickly as possible. He scanned them and realized that the type's power wasn't as significant as he thought. He began to approach them as quickly as possible and was already next to one of them. Then the boy clenched his fists and hit both scoundrels with a powerful blow to the stomach. The boys didn't expect such a turn of events, and blood started flowing from their mouths. The dullness of pain is limited and lasts for about 5 minutes, creating the impression that it was spread on purpose. Shaxian continued to swing his fists, beating up those scumbags while protecting the girl. Their faces were heavily painted, and one of them was already attacking the girl. She squeezed him very hard with her legs and grabbed his head with her hands, trying to incapacitate him. The main character was already nearby and approached the comrade she had thrown over. They were back to back, and the girl asked the little one what he was doing there. Then the boy replied that he should ask and that there were 6 opponents left. He suggested taking 3 of them. The girl asked if he was in the cafeteria, and it was obvious. Shaxian asked him to stop talking nonsense and get down to business. Then the guys raised their bats and asked not to dare underestimate them. The main character and the girl had already clenched their fists and began to expect an attack from their enemies. He asks for the last time where they deliver the goods, or does he want her to gouge out her eyes? Then the guy asked to spare them and said that he would tell her about it. It's located west of the city, in a jazz bar. When the guy said this, the girl immediately punched him as hard as she could. Shaxian said that, as far as he remembered, the jazz bar belonged to the Jiang family. Mona asked her to pretend she didn't know about it. The less she knew, the better she slept. It would be better to go home and pretend nothing had happened. Shaxian asked if she knew why he was there. It wasn't his place to get involved with 2 gangsters, but if they were on the trail of the red pill, it would be the same as being on the trail of Country Inn, and he couldn't let that slip away. Shaxian explained that he had come looking for Qin Tian to deal with him. As far as he remembered, Qin Sheng's job was to keep an eye on him so he wouldn't get to Qin Tian. Would she really lose her job if he ran into him today? The girl called him a brat and asked if he thought she couldn't drown him in the sea. The protagonist asked the girl to take him to a jazz bar. He only wanted to watch and wouldn't interfere with his business. She will be sure that he is in front of her eyes and will not bother Qin Tian, and this will be mutually beneficial. Mona thoughtfully exclaimed that it sounded logical and asked why he needed to go there. But the boy replied that she herself had heard that this was why he had a conflict with his family. The girl blushed, smiled, and said that now she understood, meaning he had run away from home. She could take him with her, but then he would have to do everything by her rules. The boy agreed, and they set off for their destination. Meanwhile, the guy was very angry, and smashing his phone, asked how Shoshin dared to block him and even dump him. And here we are, a jazz bar where the guys have arrived. The man at the door asked how many there were and if they had a reservation. Then the guy replied that there were 2 of them, and they were at table 8. The girl approached Mr. Wan and invited him into the room. She walked next to him, escorting him to the jazz bar, and blushing slightly, she closed her eyes. Then suddenly, the girl opened her eyes and took the phone out of her pocket, showing the screen to Wan. Meanwhile, the guy was in the room wearing a black suit and a tie around his neck. The party was already in full swing inside the building, and the kids were having fun and shouting joyfully. They were asked to go through and told that they could be given the car keys and they would park. And now, the guys were already entering the building, and the others were photographing them from different sides. The girl asked the boy if he saw it and said it was very simple. Did he like being the center of attention? I never thought about trying my hand at being an idol. The main character gave up and said it was just boring and his path was much more difficult. The party at the jazz bar was just getting started, and the action would get going later. And there were girls and boys relaxing, dancing, and raising their hands up, and various shouts were heard from them. Meanwhile, the guy and the girl were already entering where their VIP zone was. The man asked them what they would say about the environment and whether they were satisfied with the service. The girl smiled and began to take money out of her purse and chuckled contentedly. She asked him to order the premium package and keep the rest as a tip. The man immediately thanked the lady, and the lady said that if their Jiang was satisfied with the service, there would be even more. The man asked her not to worry and said he would arrange everything as needed. Mona praised the boy for playing the role perfectly. Then he said the bill was on her, and she called him a cheapskate. The protagonist asked her to act as she knew, and explained that he wanted to be alone for a while. Mona asked the little guy to behave himself. To be honest, she'd give him friendly advice not to go up to the 2nd floor. He might be able to go up, but he wouldn't be able to go down. The 2nd floor is Jiang Haidong's private area. There's only one entrance, and it's guarded by soldiers. You just need to act like a cool celebrity and attract some attention. Maybe watch some more videos and mimic Mike's facial expressions. What if he gets an unexpected bonus for himself? Shaoxian replied that it wasn't necessary. A weak imitation is worse than true sincerity. When he spoke, the girl turned in his direction. The protagonist asked Mona to go about her business and said that he could handle it himself. She exclaimed that he looked really cool, just like that rich kid from the big city. Then the boy asked if she was making fun of him. The girl replied that she was leaving, and he shouldn't even think about running away. If he got into trouble, she wouldn't cover for him. And the boy laughed because she was the one who dressed him up like that. From the moment he showed up here, all eyes were on him, watching his every move. So it turns out he's already trapped. The girl laughed and said that she had to admit that his little head was working pretty well. She advises him to enjoy his life as a star, and before she can leave, the girls immediately glance at him. They thought that this rascal was having fun as he wanted, and that he was lucky. She wished him luck and silently said that she would go and get down to business, taking out her phone. The girl told her boss she had a lead on the red pills. As he suspected, it was people from Jiang's group. There's a really big deal tonight, on the west side of town, at Goryos Bar. Mona said it's already there. Is it known who their partner is? He only knows that one of the parties is Jiang Haidong. The identity of the other is unknown, and he will personally intercept them when the deal begins. The girl asked the boss to send a team and block their path. They would be able to catch them in the act. Suddenly the man told Ms. Trent that the operation was canceled and that she needed to return. She asked what would happen if they missed it. He apologized and said he couldn't talk because something unexpected had happened. Xiaotian disappeared. The guy, meanwhile, looked at the screen, thinking about something. Meanwhile, he sat with a glass of whiskey and said he hadn't had such good whiskey in a long time. If he continued living like this, he would die of boredom. If he had his way, he'd stay here his whole life. And how could the man really ask if he really thought it would be his whole life? He asked him not to forget his promise. Xiaotian told Jiang that if it weren't for him, he didn't know how long his brother would have kept him locked up. Jiang laughed and told Xiaotian that he had watched him grow up and that he was like a little brother to him. How could he let him suffer? Just don't let him tell his brother about this. And of course, he was always kind to him and would never have turned him in. By the way, why was he locked up in the first place? Xiaotian explained that his brother was going to send him to the country of Wu. Jiang was very surprised and asked what had happened. Does he remember saying he was going to teach a boy a lesson? An accident happened and everything got out of control. Jiang asked if he was referring to the incident when he took the red pills. He explained that that idiot Liu Tian had led the men to surround Huang Shaochuan, and in the chaos, he took drugs right in front of everyone, which was caught on video. The situation has become complicated, and his brother is planning to send him abroad to hush it up. He was a trifle, and he could have wiped him out, but now he has suddenly become stronger. Xiaotian clenched his fist and slammed it against the wall, exclaiming that he was confident that he could settle the score with him today. But the bastard didn't show up and, what's more, even had the audacity to block his number. Then Jiang asked if his brother knew about the red pills. The guy replied that of course not, because he kept his word. He would never betray his friends, especially him, brother Jiang. And then, even if that happens. But before he could finish speaking, his gaze fell somewhere on the screen. Everyone was entitled to a premium package, courtesy of Mr. Jiang's VIP client. Jiang suggested that it looked like that little star, Zhang Che. But Xiaotian exclaimed that he was mistaken and that it wasn't Zhang Che. It's him and he would recognize him, even if only a handful of ashes remained of him. It's definitely that Xiaoxian guy. Xiaotian happily grabbed his head with his hands and exclaimed that he didn't expect to see him here. He asked his friend to help him catch him because he wanted to beat him to death. He immediately asked for red pills. If he hadn't cheated, he wouldn't forgive him. So Jiang agreed and asked his friends to give him a double dose of red pills. Boss Jiang told the girl sitting next to the main character to drug the guy next to her. She then immediately started making advances towards him, and he thought about it. The guy replied that they were just regular guests and had come to have fun. Then she asked again if he came to have fun, and then they would call him Little One. He'd heard from friends that a new product had appeared on the coast, and they said it was a great deal. Xiaoxian asked if they had it. He seemed to have just heard the faint buzz of a phone and took a closer look at the girl. When she asked if her brother liked games, he realized that something was clearly wrong and that she had a microphone in her ear. Xiaoxian immediately asked about the red pills, and the girl said that it seemed like she knew a lot. The boy asked if she could get him some pills, and he promised to pay. The girl said she'd have some fun with the younger one in exchange for the pleasure, and she offered to have a drink first, and then they'd fix it for her later. Xiaoxian asked if they were sold here and why he hadn't noticed. He noticed that both girls were being overly pushy. She explained that, of course, they had their own methods. If he really wanted to know, she'd tell him after he'd had a drink. The protagonist had a bad feeling and agreed, thinking it was a conspiracy against him. He thought to himself that the Zhang family is connected to the red pills. This club belongs to them, and he is most likely behind all this. Why doesn't he know this? The boy exclaimed that he would drink it all in one gulp. They said he was amazing. He downed such strong alcohol in one gulp. And she had never seen anything like it. The second girl said she wanted to see it too, and let the youngest drink it in one gulp. Then the protagonist remembered again the old Eastern proverb. To catch a tiger cub, you have to go into the tiger's den. The girl asked what was wrong with him and if everything was okay. The boy thought that if his instincts were correct, this could be a key step toward his revenge. He could even try witch's poison to get revenge. When the boy opened his eyes, they asked him to wake up, calling him a scoundrel. The main character was tied to a chair, and Xiaotian stood in front of him. He laughed and exclaimed that he had fallen into his hands. The guy started laughing very loudly and exclaimed that he was going to die laughing. And what did they say? You look everywhere, and it turns out to be right at your fingertips. He laughed again and asked if that wasn't true. He stood in front of the main character, who was on his knees, and covered in beads of sweat, cast a contemptuous glance at him. The boy realized that he had come with him. He couldn't understand why Qin Tian was here. He wondered if this was all a setup or just a coincidence. After what happened today, it was clear that his brother Qing Sheng and Zhang Huaizhong were at odds with each other. Qing Sheng would not allow Qin Tian to end up with the enemy, and it seems the real reason lies elsewhere. Xiao Tian exclaimed that he was speaking to him and asked where he had hatched his balls. He grabbed his hair and lifted his head. The protagonist replied that he didn't even know whether he was too stupid or just too gullible. In any case, he did a great job of setting up his brother. And the scoundrel immediately called him a scumbag. He clenched his fist and, hitting him in the face with all his might, asked him to stop talking nonsense. He asked Huang Shaoxian to first verify all the facts. He's just a dog being led to the slaughter, and he's the one holding the knife. But the boy wondered what kind of hunter he was if he'd fallen into his own trap. How much effort his brother had expended to keep him alive. If he were in his brother's place, he would have let him drown in the river at birth. At least he wouldn't have died because of him. And he plays the hero at school. Gets punched in the face, and his brother has to decide for him and shut everyone up with money. That's okay. But if he dies because of him, was it worth it? He is sure that his brother has regretted 1,000 times that he has someone like him, and what will he say now? Is he right? The guy immediately asked the two to clear the way and said he'd skin him alive today. Meanwhile, the boy turned to his boss. Zhang sat on a chair, a red ring glittering and shimmering on his finger. The boy thought that here he was, and that meant his guess had been correct. The kidnapping is merely a cover, and its true target is actually Qin Tian. Numerous gangs operate in District 26, and while they outwardly obey Qing Sheng, internally, hostility rages. Why is Qin Sheng fighting the red pills? It's obvious he's Zhang Huaizhong's opponent. The key now is to latch on to one thread, and by following it, he can find those behind the inside. In other words, if he catches Zhang Huaizhong, he will definitely find a thread leading to his location. Xiao Tian became very angry, and calling him a scoundrel, he exclaimed that he was talking to him. The protagonist clenched his fists and decided that this would happen later, and that something completely different was important today. He has good power and punching speed, but his accuracy is probably lacking. The strength in both arms is balanced. He does not favor one over the other, and the center of gravity is stable. He looked his opponent in the eye and asked if he had decided to go head-on from the start. This guy was already approaching him, and he noticed that he had let go of his stance and therefore decided to break through his defense with brute force. But the main character understood when the boy approached him with a blow that it was very stupid. When he had already missed and the boy returned, he realized that he was not strong enough. Shaoxian immediately dodged his attack again and tried to concentrate. He decided that he would not deny that he really did have talent as he approached his opponent, but he noticed that this guy was too reckless and realized that this was his advantage in this battle. As he approached, the boy had already put out his fist and hit him with all his might in the face. He didn't have time to dodge and very cleverly found the moment to knock out several of his teeth. When the main character approached him again with blows, he could not understand how this was even possible. When he became so strong and it's just incredible nonsense, how can he lose to him? He doesn't believe it, because it's simply impossible, and he is the strongest and must remain the winner. Xiao Tian was extremely angry and clenched his fist, ready to punch him with all his might. But again, he failed, and his anger knew no bounds, so he lost. The main character noticed that his opponent was moving well and had some strength left, but there was a problem. From his point of view, he was one big weak spot. After he said this, a punch landed right on his chin. Then with his other hand, he hit him from the other side, and the guy flew straight to the floor. When he knocked it over, he jumped up and kicked him in the head so hard that blood splattered in all directions. When he finished it, he stopped, and beads of sweat ran down his face. He continued to look at him, calling him a hunter, and asked if this was all he was capable of. Xiaotian raised himself up a little and began to swallow the pill that was in his hand while he was still alive. When he swallowed the pill, it began to dissolve in him, and he turned red. His veins began to tense, and his eyes turned red from such powerful energy and strength. The protagonist realized that this scoundrel had actually taken the pill and thought that this was actually a very good thing. He was preparing for another attack, and decided that the real spectacle was just beginning. He covered himself with his hand and waited for the man who had just taken a pill. And now they were face to face, and the battle continued. The guys were already approaching each other, and Xiaotian asked his comrade to die. He put out his fist and approached him with great anger and hatred. But before he could get close, the main character pushed him far back with a lightning strike. After the pill, he became a completely different opponent, and an order of magnitude stronger. His physical strength and speed seemed to be stronger than he had ever had before, and he was surprised by this. The enemy had already clenched his fists, and his eyes were glowing with a bright, fiery light. He approached him and tried to strike, but the protagonist returned. Xiaotian noticed that his strength had become much greater than that of those thugs on the pier. Had he really taken more than one red pill? His opponent started laughing and telling him he'd crush him to dust. He asked to enjoy the last minutes of his life and clenched his fist. But the main character thought that this would happen if he himself did not die earlier and put up a block. Pills drive any person crazy, and before they doom him to death. The longer he lives after his reincarnation, the more he begins to appreciate Eastern wisdom. Jing asked his friend if he had taken a photo, and he said no problem. Everything was already taken. Jiang hinted that this would be their trump card against Qin Sheng. He had already come up with a headline for the newspapers. The brother of a prominent businessman died of an overdose after beating a classmate to death. He smoked a cigarette and talked about how his death was predetermined and would die by his hand. How self-assured he was. Let him show me what he's capable of and why he's not resisting. He was sticking his chest out like that, and now it's like he's swallowed his tongue. The protagonist noticed that his strength was no longer growing, meaning the drug's effect had reached its peak. He realized that the moment had truly come and let the pain eat him up from the inside. He approached him, and when the enemy tried to hit him, he dodged. Xiaotian called him a little scoundrel and asked him not to dare run away from him. He approached the protagonist again and hit him in the face with all his might. The boy rolled over, but then got back on his feet and also struck him. The enemy began to cough, and streams of scarlet blood began to flow from his mouth. Xiaotian jumped as high as he could again, to strike him on the head. He jumped and hit him in the nose with his elbow, and he began to roll over. His face was broken, and it was as if something had happened in his brain, and his look had changed. The protagonist flew up to him again and grabbed his hand with all his might. After that, he hit him very hard in the face with his elbow, and he began to fall. Streams of blood flowed from his eyes and mouth, and he began to scream in bewilderment. Then the boy started to do a move on him, breaking his arm so much that he was simply in shock. He broke his arm and turned him over and threw him to the floor, which he did not expect. Blood streamed constantly from his eyes and nose. Xiaotian screamed in bewilderment and pain. Then the main character asked if it hurt him, and it was probably unbearable. The enemy exclaimed that he was in genuine pain and asked to be released. The pill boosts physical performance and dulls pain, making the user feel invulnerable. But if the damage received exceeds the permissible limit, the effect is reversed. If he's not mistaken, then he took more than one pill, which means he's in for a double payback. This is simply a real miracle, and he himself accepted the weapon that cuts from both sides. The enemy exclaimed, turning to the protagonist, that he surrendered and asked to let him go. But the boy replied that he was afraid it was impossible, and that before he finished him off, he was waiting for his forgiveness. The enemy looked at him, his pride preventing him from doing so. But Xiaotian again asked him to apologize for all his misdeeds. Xiaotian was simply shocked, because how could he apologize, and was he really telling him to ask for forgiveness? He understood to himself that this was simply unthinkable. And was he really forcing him to beg for forgiveness? The main character had already begun to clench his fist in order to finally deliver the blow. Because the boy said he'd crush Xiaotian into dust, he was already clenching his fist to attack. He exclaimed, looking at his opponent, that he was not capable of more and delivered a powerful blow. He realized that he had definitely lost, and even after taking 2 pills, this guy beat him. The employee told Mr. Jiang that there were 3 of these pills, and he took one at the bar. Even if the dosage was weaker, it is still more than the average person can handle. But was he really dead? And would his plan simply vanish? A loud burst of laughter rang out, and the protagonist's name was called. The man covered his face with his hands and said that he was too angry at the main character. He was standing in the ring and he was the winner in this situation, which was just a shock to others. Cheng held his hand to his face and thought that this was just a disaster. He was lying on the ring, the man who was just knocked out by the main character, and everyone was watching. The boy thought it looked like it would be a nasty fight, and luckily there weren't that many of them. He was exhausted from the night, so he needed to get it over with as soon as possible. Suddenly the guy got angry and asked what they were waiting for and asked to tear him to shreds. The comrades immediately listened to him and began to approach the main character, who was in the middle of the ring. One of the guys approached him and started hitting him right in the face, but he managed to dodge. Then the guys continued to fight and try to hit the main character, but he again dodged the blow. Shaxian again began to hit the one who approached him, and hitting him in the face, he flew far back. The guy covered himself with his hand when they started hitting him, and the other guys were already approaching. Shaxian began to wave off those who were already approaching him, and they pushed him to the edge of the ring. They pinned him down, and he tried to resist his attackers by fighting them off. The boy fought back with his hands and feet and hit one of them very hard. Then the others also approached him and tried to strike, but he dodged. Everything's too slow, and he needs to end this useless brawl before his strength runs out. The main character decided that he had more important things to do, and suddenly he heard some sound. The boy became alert and felt some pressure behind him, and it was his opponent. The enemy who was lying on his back said, while doing a move, that it was not bad at all. He backed himself into a corner to limit their attacks and deal with each one in turn. Impressive even for an old mercenary like him. And is he really a student? He was radiating a strong desire to kill, and he'd probably already killed quite a few people. The boy decided he needed to get out of here as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, the girl was already approaching and began to confront her opponents with great force. She looked at the main character and asked him to help her and cover her from the others. But was he really only good at using his tongue? It seemed like I needed to let him get closer to do anything. And so Mona and Shaxian headed towards the opponents, scattering them into different corners. The girl jumped as high as she could and struck one of the villains square in the chest. As he was about to strike her, she fell to her knees and dodged the powerful blow just in time. Then another opponent approached her and she rose as high as she could and dropped her knees right onto his chest, breaking it. Mona suddenly stuck some kind of stake, a small and inconspicuous object, right into his heart. The man asked his people to seize him immediately and destroy him on the spot. But suddenly he exclaimed that things were really bad, and they were trapped. Another blow landed on the enemy's face and he fell back. The man stood in front of the ring and watched attentively what was happening. He clenched his fist and tried to see who was already in front of him. He realized it was Qin Sheng. The man was already approaching the boys, looking at them seriously. He thought that since he had already appeared, he would hardly be able to escape from him. Whoever takes down Qin Shaxian will receive $500,000 and a promotion to regional manager. Let there be a life for a life, and the guy hit the second one on the head with all his might. Then he dropped him straight to the floor, hitting him in the face with all his might, pressing down with his hand. One of the guys asked if he was Qin Sheng. They said that he was the main thug. It looks like the rumors were definitely true. Well, to be honest, he's a so-called bandit compared to professional mercenaries like his guys. When he approached him with a blow, he called him a worthless piece of trash and hit him on the head with all his might. They approached each other again and the boy flew far back when the opponent hit him. Suddenly he closed his eyes because the blow was too strong and he could not open them. Mercenary Gija was knocked out in seconds and he is too strong. How can you even fight him? The boy looked at his opponent from afar. When he saw it, he smiled slyly and screamed. He, in turn, looked at him menacingly and his eyes glowed red. Shuang exclaimed that he didn't care because he was alone, and there were many of them, so he had to rush into the attack. Anyone who fails him will receive 2 million, and a transfer to the main office is mandatory. Then the guy exclaimed that he would definitely take the risk and began to approach the enemy. The girl asked to give her just a few minutes and prepared to carry out the order. Then her boss looked at his comrade and said that he was counting on Xiao Tian. The boy clenched his fists and prepared to repel the attack. There was a powerful explosion after the impact, as the guy was in a red haze. He pinned his opponent right into the ring, and in an instant, it was all over. He wasn't even human, but some kind of monster, and it was a terrifying sight to see. The guy was a killing machine, and it was simply horrifying. The girl called her boss and said that the young gentleman had woken up. When the guy came to his senses, he started calling for a Huang Shaoxian and said that he would kill him. Shen turned his head in her direction and asked how he was. She replied that his life was not in danger, but that he needed to be examined at the hospital. She thought about how his face was completely smashed, yet he was still muttering something. Honestly, he was only alive thanks to Huang Shaoxian. If he hadn't smashed his face in and bled him out, he would have been a vegetable for the rest of his days. But could Huang Xiuyan have done this intentionally? Otherwise, why drag out the fight so long with his skills? The guy stood in the middle of the ring and asked his guys where this brat had gone. They wondered where this Qin Sheng came from. The guy was talking on the phone and saying that he couldn't get through and not now. Meanwhile, the unlocking was successful. And he said that they should just die, because they were scum anyway. Qin Sheng was just a pathetic ant. With this, he, Zhang Huaizhuang, will rise again even if the whole world turns against him. The guy suddenly laughed and exclaimed that his influence had never been dreamed of by the main character, but he was already behind him. He said that there was an old proverb that says that while a praying mantis is catching a cicada, a nightingale is already sneaking up behind it, and that is exactly the situation now. However, Qin Xiaotian's intervention triggered a chain reaction. It seemed Qin Sheng's men were everywhere, and they needed to leave, while the intelligence could wait. The ring was like that of a traitor who had renounced his faith, his side, and his comrades, and betrayed him. All their rings have the same dark and ominous design. Why does the local bandit have the same ring as Tommy? Could they possibly belong to the same group in Country N, the Moonblade, or perhaps the Church of the Moonlight? Meanwhile, the guy was already in full swing, waving his legs and arms. The enemy stood opposite him and also hit him with all his might, so that blood sprayed in all directions. One big guy laughed and exclaimed that he was even worse and that today was only 7. He was holding back so badly, otherwise they would die from one blow. Looks like their boss did it too. Wow, he took out 5 of them in less than a minute. If he'd hit them at full force, it would have been over in a second. The guy gave the order to check everything again and not miss anyone. The man told his boss that there was no one outside and asked what he should do next. The boss replied that they should turn everything upside down and find Jiang Huaizhong immediately. The boy asked how Xiao Tian was doing and whether he would suffer any consequences. The girl replied that there would be some and that there was too much poison in his body. With proper care, he might fully recover, but otherwise, there would be consequences, such as speech impediment. Shen asked Ms. Trent if he'd asked her to keep an eye on him. She explained that she hadn't expected everything to happen immediately after she left. This little brat is nothing but trouble, and whenever he finds someone, he'll prick his ears up. But suddenly they saw some guy and asked who it was. The protagonist wrapped a belt around Jian Huaizhong's neck and brought him out to everyone. Shaxian continued to hold him tightly and asked everyone to immediately step aside if they didn't want him to die. It seems that hiding is not an option now, and Shen asked the little one to hand him over here because this is not a game. But let it go. They won't be able to cope with what will happen next. And the main character looked closely at the guys. Apparently their life was not as valuable as they thought, and he turned to Mr. Jiang. The boy gave the order to all units to get ready immediately. They immediately agreed, and the protagonist continued to strangle the scoundrel. These guys have amazing discipline and don't look like a street gang at all. The boy asked to stop complaining and breathe evenly. Only then would he survive. He thought to himself that he needed to get out of here before he was surrounded, and then it would definitely be the end for him. Meanwhile, his opponent was still lying in the ring and whispered his name. Meanwhile, someone was already getting ready to come into the room and people were ready. He asked the boy why he lost to him, and streams of blood continued to flow from his mouth. Xiaotian asked the boy if he really thought he was just a worthless loser. The protagonist continued to hold Jiang Huaizhong by the throat, tightening the belt even more. How one can feel the murderous aura of the person who approached them. He was pumped up with red pills and began to wave his fists at Shaoxian. The battle continued, and many people were already scattered around the perimeter. He looked at Qin Sheng and thought that he had probably underestimated him. Did he really want to spit on whether Jiang Huaizhong survived or not? His aura was truly deadly, and after taking these pills, he was incredibly strong. The guy kept swinging his fists, and he was so exhausted that he couldn't even dodge a blow, let alone parry one. He was completely spent after a night of fighting, and counterattacking was simply impossible. This aura is too deadly, and could it be because of revenge against his brother? This is very bad for him right now. If he doesn't take action immediately, it will all be over very quickly. The main character could not understand what to do in this situation, since he was completely exhausted. While the boys were fighting, Jian Huaizhong approached them, holding an iron bat in his hands. When Mona saw that he was walking behind the boy, she asked him to be careful. He was already approaching faster and faster and ended up behind Qin Sheng. Meanwhile, the guy tried to hit the main character, but he dodged it in time. But the next blow landed right on the back of the protagonist's head, and blood spurted from his mouth. Shaxian suddenly fell straight to the ground after this blow, and he could not understand how this could have happened. Someone asked Qin Sheng to wait and talk. Their leader. This is a cop from the inspection department of one bureau. The command was given. Hands behind your head and on the ground. The third squad began to cover, while the second defended Xiao Tian and retreated. The police officer called the Western squad and explained that the suspect was resisting and they were requesting backup. The girl called for someone to come to her because they had a wounded man. He was rapidly losing consciousness and needed an ambulance immediately. He finally woke up, and the girl was sitting in the room. She really didn't like the smell in the hospital, She was the sister of Xiaodian's eldest daughter, Qin Xiaoyang. So that's who she is, the third deputy in the design group, Xiaotin's free sister and Kai's biological sister. So it was she who came with the cops. Shaxian asked if she was with them or if she was also from the police. The girl explained that all his wounds had been treated and he had a mild concussion. He'd feel unwell for a couple of days, but nothing serious. He asked if she was from the police. His head was pounding and a cigarette wouldn't hurt. The girl replied that it wasn't quite that, but that she simply had her own connections. He wasn't stupid, so she'd say straight out that he had the key that Zhang Huizhang had previously held. Shaxian decided that he was either with her or the cops, and Qin Sheng hadn't touched him. And anyway, it was strange because he didn't care whether Zhang was alive or not. Then why was he chasing the goods? Besides, he didn't understand what she was talking about. The boy explained that he didn't have any key and asked if it was a ring or if she was talking about this small box. Qin Xiaoyang asked him not to pretend, and Zhang Huizheng told him that he definitely took it. But when they searched him, they did not find him, and they searched everywhere. He thought about how important this secret key was. Even the cops were hunting it. But if they knew Zhang Huizhang had it, why did they wait until the end of the battle to look for it? The girl asked how he'd pulled it off and how he'd managed to hide it. Shaxian replied that he had no idea what he was talking about and asked her for a cigarette. Qin Xiaoyang said she'd done some research and that he was only in trouble because of her brother. This is not his level. It is too dangerous for a simple student, so she asks to just give it back. Return to his usual routine and stay away, otherwise he and his family will suffer. Shakin's eyes changed when he heard the threat. He clearly doesn't like it when someone threatens him, especially his beloved family. He looked at the girl and asked what she was going to do to his family. She listened attentively to the protagonist's question and immediately chuckled in response. She asked not to be misunderstood, and she's not that kind of person at all. But Qin Sheng was a different matter. And it felt like a predator was staring right at her. It gave her goosebumps. The protagonist wondered why she was scaring him with Qin Sheng's name. He asked what she was talking about and what he would do. The girl explained that she herself didn't know, because anything could be expected from such a scumbag. So it's not just about him. And when the rumors spread, he will become the enemy of all the influential people in the 28th district. Qin Xiaoyang told the boy that since he knew she had connections with the police, he should just give her the key. Don't waste time. Give her the key quickly. Shaxian told the girl that she seemed to be missing the point of the situation from the very beginning. She'd been lecturing non-stop. She hadn't heard a word he said and asked him to skip the part about him having nothing at all. Even if he had, he wouldn't have given her anything. And why should he trust her? Lady Qin, or maybe Qin Xiaotian's sister. The guy from her security asked him what he was doing and asked him to move away from the girl. Then he asked what if she betrayed him as soon as she got that thing. It was so important. Wouldn't it be better to keep it to yourself? To have an advantage? If you're going to give it away, let's give it to someone truly powerful. You might even be rewarded generously. He came closer and closer to the girl, and she looked at him with fear. Her security guard had already burst into the room and told the boy he was asking for trouble. Before he could finish speaking, the main character dodged his deft blow in time. He asked if she would just force him to submit in the end, and said that their whole family was birds of a feather. The girl listened to him attentively, and her gaze was unapproachable. The guard started waving his fists again, and exclaimed that he just wanted to catch her again. The girl asked to stop, but the guard told the lady that if she gave him a minute, he would certainly deal with it. But Madame Qin became angry, and asked him to immediately shut up and go away. Then the guard immediately obeyed her, and began to approach the door, leaving her alone with him. The protagonist asked if he would close the door behind him, and immediately thanked him. The guard looked angrily in his direction, chuckled in displeasure, and closed the door behind him. The boy remained in the room and simply looked at him sarcastically, and as if nothing had happened. When they were alone, he took out a cigarette and was glad that he finally had a smoke break. The boy asked Mrs. Qin, when she looked at him with fear, not to take everything seriously. Everything he said was just a joke. He asked her not to take it personally, and honestly, he didn't have the key. Now he'd said everything and she could go, but he'd keep the cigarettes. The girl listened to him attentively, and closing her eyes, began to think about something. Then she turned to the main character and said that he would clearly regret it. Then the boy gave her an angry look and asked her to remember to close the door behind her. He thought about that key, as he'd never heard of it before, not even in his past life. But now it's clear that many powerful forces are connected to him. The Zhangs, the Qins, the cops, and maybe even Tommy himself. From a broader perspective, it's all connected, and there's some hidden thread. He feels this key will lead him to retribution, and nothing else matters. Meanwhile, Mrs. Jiang was already entering the room, and the guy was opening the car door for her. She was already in the back seat and said she was back. The man asked her if she had received the key. The woman explained that no, and he wouldn't give it back. Maybe he really didn't have the key. But the man took the girl by the hands and said that he had to have the secret key. He did not relent and said that they had to get him at any cost. Only by possessing it will they be able to realize their dream, both for the sake of their ideals and for the sake of the city. In the end, they have to do this for the sake of the family, and they have to defeat Qin Sheng. The main character after I left the hospital, I continued training. But he decided it wasn't enough, and he was still too weak. He was still far from his limit. Time is no longer on his side, and he needs to hurry as soon as possible. 6 months ago, he died not of natural causes, but unexpectedly in the body of a young man named Xiaotian. He taught the scoundrels who bullied the boy a lesson, and thus made a bitter enemy of a young man from a mafia family, Qin Xiaotian. Since then, one unexpected event followed another. A female agent with a secret past, as well as a powerful underworld boss. The genuine Haiwan drug, nicknamed the Red Pill, and all these people and events that should not have happened in a Shazian's life began to bring trouble. And everything spun much faster than he thought. But the benefits exceeded all his expectations, because fate seemed to smile on him. And he became one step closer to his revenge. Mass drug production, and the shadows of the underworld behind it all. A failed mission, the betrayal of a close friend, all of it ultimately brings him back to square one. The ring and the secret that stretches back to the abyss that lurks beyond. Whether it's a single person, a cult, or a huge organization, he doesn't know. But his instinct tells him that before he can reach their level, he urgently needs to become stronger. All signs point to a storm brewing in the 25 area. It's as if a giant vortex is about to engulf everything around it. And now that he has the so-called secret key, he needs to figure out its purpose as quickly as possible and seize the initiative. There are things he needs to face, and he was reborn. But Huang Shaoshan died, and he gave him his second chance. He inherited not only his body and life, but also the connections that belonged only to him. He had a family, and that was something he never had in his past life. The boy decided it was time to find out the truth. He overheard the conversation and realized his parents were there. The man said that since he had decided to do this, he should have warned her in advance, and from that moment on, he was not his son. The girl asked to go through and said that now she would prepare the papers that needed to be signed. The parents immediately thanked her, and entering the room, they became curious about where he had disappeared to. After all, the girl hadn't seen him leave. Shaxian wondered if he was experiencing some strange feeling, and whether he was running from it. Since when had he started hesitating? Since when had he become so bad at relationships? The man told his darling that he missed her very much. She asked him not to rush, as her husband wasn't home and they didn't have to rush. The boy looked carefully at the things lying on the floor. He thought that his clothes were so-so, but it was better to do something quickly. He's starving and will find somewhere to eat. You can't solve anything on an empty stomach. The boy wanted some dumplings and concluded that he really needed to eat properly. Meanwhile, one of the guys was sitting in the car and calling his leader. He told the leader that they had found him. Meanwhile, the protagonist was already at the pot of dumplings, tucking into them. The guy told the chef to make another batch of steamed dumplings. He was surprised and said that he had a voracious appetite. And the boy replied that, as they say, in the East there is nothing tastier than dumplings. The boss exclaimed that he couldn't believe he was the second person to complete the challenge with all 70 pieces. "I'll come in today. No need to pay." Suddenly the bell rang and the guys entered the room, greeting the chef. The boy was surprised to be second, and the cook replied that their hero was standing before them. When he asked if he wanted his usual pelmeni, he declined, explaining that he'd just come to chat. In front of him stood his opponent, who greeted Shosian and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. Then the main character smiled slyly, and continuing to eat, asked if he was going to avenge his little brother. Shen replied that he had thoroughly looked into what had happened between him and his brother. He admits that Xiao Tian did wrong and will not continue this conflict. However, how he destroyed his will, others may not have noticed, but he saw everything and he does not like it at all. Shaxian replied that if he wanted to stick up for his youngest, he'd better go home and express his feelings in his diary. He didn't care at all whether he was happy or not. Shen's comrade asked if he even understood who he was talking to. Shen waved his hand and exclaimed that everything was fine and that he should wait for him outside. The protagonist smiled again and called him a good boy, and Shen decided to get straight to the point. He approached the table and asked the boy if he still had the item. Then he looked at him carefully and asked if he had given it to Xiao Yan. Then Shaxian closed his eyes, chuckled and said that he had no idea what he was talking about. The guy continued to stare at him and asked him not to test his patience, as his patience was not eternal. Then the protagonist raised his contemptuous gaze at him and exclaimed that they, the Qing family, are all the same. And he had already clearly said that he did not know. It's useless to put pressure on him because he doesn't have this thing, and why is it so difficult for them to understand it? Shen continued smoking a cigarette in front of him and asked permission to give him some advice. This isn't for the likes of him. It's too dangerous to get involved in the murky affairs of the 26th district. The main character asked him, smiling in response, what he would do in this case. It seemed he didn't fully understand the situation, and Shen explained that he didn't come here to negotiate. Let him consider this his final warning and control himself. If he doesn't think about himself, then let him at least think about his loved ones. This is the second time he's told him this, and he won't repeat it again. He's in no position to decide anything. Shaxian was furious as hell while he was saying this. He explained to his enemy that if even a hair fell from the head of any member of his family, he swears to wring the necks of all the Qins with his own hands. The guy turned away, continued smoking, and told the main character that he couldn't wait. Shen told his comrade that they needed to return to headquarters and change cars, and he agreed. Meanwhile, the main character, clenching his teeth, cast a farewell glance at them. How many times have they threatened him? The Qing family, the Zhang family, the police, and even the top brass want to get this secret key. It seems his value is much higher than he thought, and he can help him get revenge. But what if he keeps him for himself? In any case, the parents are not guilty of anything. In all honesty, he should have just stayed away from them, and it might have been better. But he began to think that he was no longer just the orphan he had been before from the battlefield. He imagined his parents in front of him, and realized that he was now their son, Huang Shaoxian. O great all-powerful Lord of the Sun, he very earnestly asked him to give him a sign. Suddenly his father called him, and he realized that it was just in time that he decided to tell him the whole truth. He started to tell the truth, but his father asked him to return immediately because his mother had been kidnapped. The main character was simply shocked and did not expect his father to tell such sad news. He explained that they went downstairs to look for him, when suddenly a group of men in black jumped out of a car. He was knocked down before he could react, and his mother was dragged into the car. Shen told the main character while he was still next to him that this was his last warning. Father asked him to return immediately. He was currently giving a statement at the hospital entrance. Shaxian, enraged, exclaimed that this was the end for Qinsheng. The girl was talking on the phone and called him a little bastard. Apparently he finally answered. The boy asked where Qinsheng was, to which she responded, calling him a cur, that he was calling again. Was he really working for him as a servant? The boy asked her to stop chatting and explained that the matter was extremely urgent. He was holding Shaxian's mother hostage and wanted to force him to hand over the secret key. Both the government and the mafia want him, and that speaks for itself. As long as he has the key, his mother will be fine. But if he gives it up, no one can guarantee her life. The boy continued shouting into the phone and asking the girl where he was. He explained that he couldn't just sit and wait, as stealing the car would definitely attract attention. He asks her to just say so, and he will give her the rest of the training fees for this month. The girl explained that it was not about money at all, but the boy asked Mona to speak immediately. He asked her to forget about the money and said that he would do everything she wanted and that there was no time left. She thought about just hanging up, but he continued talking to her, asking for help. The main character asked her to stop squeezing her breasts and act faster. Mona explained that his car was currently on the Deng Deng Expressway, heading east, 32 kilometers to the next toll plaza. Specifically, a black SUV. The boy asked how many people were with him, and what the license plate number of the car was. He decided that this was very good, and that he could still catch up with them. The girl also told me what the car's license plate was, and explained that there was only one car following her so far, and she wasn't sure how many people were there. She also explained that the tail was following it. The protagonist immediately thanked the girl, and thought that the den and highway was congested. And this was his chance to maneuver. He exclaimed to the girl as he said goodbye that he would definitely repay the debt, and short beeps were heard on the phone. She didn't care because the mission was over, and it was no longer her business. The cars drove along the Dan and highway. The guy behind the wheel was saying that the boss had been really busy lately, constantly running back and forth to the mayor's office. Was there anything big brewing there? The guy responded by asking them to just go and not ask any unnecessary questions. But still, why change cars just to go to the city hall? But the guy again said that if he valued his job, he should better keep his mouth shut and do as he was told without interfering in this. While the guys were talking, the driver suddenly looked into the left mirror and noticed something there. He remarked, looking at the motorcyclist, that there were flashing lights in broad daylight. They tried to look closely and saw something as if in a mirror. The guy exclaimed that he hated biker thugs because they acted like they owned the road, and he asked if he wanted to die, but then a guy on a motorcycle was already next to him. The main character very cleverly turned the steering wheel of the car in the other direction, and an accident occurred. It was very good, and he continued to drive further since these guys had nowhere to run. The boy got rid of the tail and continued chasing his main goal. The guy driving told his boss that it looked like Shin and the others had been in an accident. He asked if they should stop and check, after which the boss gave the order to continue driving. Shen, looking down, thought he had a very bad feeling about this. He asked for the noise cancellation system to be turned on, the horn to be muted, and the accelerator to be pressed. The main character was riding a motorcycle and could not see who was inside the car. He has no chance to look there and will have to act with what he has. Thinking back to both times he met Sheng, he acted the same way. The boy remembered his facial expressions, tone, manner of behavior, and everything was according to the same pattern. So he's acting out of habit and is probably sitting in the back seat. That's enough, and it's time to go all in. He actually increased his speed and started to overtake one of the cars as quickly as possible. What he didn't do on the road, and it was simply an inexplicable sight. There had already been several accidents, and the driver had barely managed to turn the car. Shen couldn't understand why he was driving like that. Suddenly, the car also turned around and crashed right into the highway. When the driver asked the boss how he was, he replied that he was fine. As expected, they came for him. He gave the command to activate the explosion-proof mode, and the mode was already activated, after which the countdown began. Shen adjusted his tie on his chest and decided to see what would happen next. The countdown continued, and the main character raced faster and faster on his bike. Shaxian was very angry, and his eyes glowed with a red fiery light, and he was already close to the cars. He was approaching, and the report had already reached the number 4. Shen noticed an object approaching at very high speed, and they froze in anticipation. Shen was fully prepared, and when the number reached 2, he put his hand on his head. The main character was already riding his motorcycle right up to the car at full speed. Shen grabbed his head with his hand when the number reached 1. But when the boy ended up in the back seat next to him, the system gave an error. Shen exclaimed that he would never have thought it would be him, looking into his eyes. Shaxian said that he had already told him that if he dared to hurt his family, he would destroy his entire family, starting with him.